In every corner of the world, beneath deserts, hidden in caves, resting in ancient tombs, and buried under forgotten cities, lie artifacts that whisper of worlds long gone. Bronze heads with lifelike eyes, golden crowns lost to the earth, temples carved by hands we can no longer name. Each one holds a question, each one carries a silence, and tonight, we follow their trail, from the caves of Malta to the sands of Egypt, to the frozen lands of Siberia. Settle in, let the mysteries unfold, and before the last secret fades, you may already be asleep. The votive horses of Luristan. In the rugged highlands of western Iran, where the mountains rise like walls against the sky, and valleys twist into forgotten paths, lies a mystery that has outlived empires, outlasted kingdoms, and endured longer than memory itself. Here, beneath the soil, hidden in graves and shrines, archaeologists discovered something small. Not towering temples, not giant monuments, but delicate objects of bronze, tiny horses, silent horses, horses that never moved, yet somehow still traveled across 3,000 years to reach us today. These are the votive horses of Luristan, and they whisper to us in silence. The land of Luristan has always been harsh. Steep slopes, sharp winds, rivers cutting deep through stone. The people who lived here were close to the earth, close to the wild, close to the animals that gave them strength. Among those animals, one stood above the rest, the horse. The horse was not just a beast of burden, it was freedom, it was speed, it was power. To shape the horse in bronze was to honor it, to make it eternal, to give it a place in both life and afterlife. But why so small, why so plain, why so many, scattered like seeds across the soil? These questions hang in the air like smoke, and the answers remain hidden in time. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture a craftsman, almost 3,000 years ago. He sits by the fire, the glow of molten bronze flickering across his face. He pours the glowing liquid into a clay mold. He waits. The air is hot, heavy. Then, he breaks the mold, and in his hands a horse appears. It does not move. It does not breathe, but it shines. A horse, born of fire and earth. That horse may have been placed on an altar, or lowered into a tomb, or offered to the unseen gods of mountain and sky. And then, the earth closed around it. The centuries began. Seasons changed. Storms passed. Peoples came and went. But under the soil, the bronze remained, waiting. Until one day, long after its makers were forgotten, the soil was brushed away, and the little horse returned to the light. But when it returned, it gave us no answers, no inscriptions, no messages, no voice. It simply stood in silence. And that silence pulls us in. That silence makes us lean closer. Were these horses guardians of the dead, companions for the journey beyond life? Were they prayers, cast in metal, meant to last forever, or were they something stranger still, symbols of a lost belief we can no longer imagine? We do not know, and perhaps we never will. Think of the horse itself. The legs are straight, the body is simple, the head almost abstract. Sometimes a rider sits upon its back, faceless, formless, eternal. These are not toys, not decorations. They are deliberate, intentional, sacred. Their simplicity is their power. Bronze does not decay like flesh. Bronze does not rot like wood. Bronze remembers, and in remembering, it carries the soul of its maker. When you hold one, you do not only hold metal, you hold a fragment of devotion. You hold a fragment of mystery. Now imagine holding one in your hand. It is small, cold, heavy for its size. You feel its weight pressing against your palm. Not just the weight of bronze, but the weight of centuries. You ask yourself, who last held this before me? A priest, chanting over an altar? A warrior, praying before battle? A grieving mother, leaving it at the tomb of a child? The answers are lost, but the questions remain, and sometimes questions are more powerful than answers. The horses of Luristan do not move, yet they carry us. They carry us backward, across centuries. They carry us into a world we can no longer see, a world of ritual, a world of silence, and as we follow them, we realize something. The past is never gone. It waits in the earth. It waits in objects. It waits in silence. Think again of the craftsman, the hammer striking bronze, the rhythm echoing into the night, each strike shaping not just metal, but meaning, each figure a prayer, each horse a voice. And though those voices are quiet now, we still listen. We strain to hear. We listen not with ears, but with imagination. And perhaps that is the point. Perhaps these horses were never meant to give us answers. Perhaps they were meant to keep us wondering, to remind us that some mysteries are eternal. The votive horses of Luristan are not grand like pyramids. They are not vast like temples. They are humble, quiet, patient, and in their patience they hold power. They remind us that the smallest object can carry the largest mystery. They remind us that silence can speak. They remind us that the past still lives. The horse waits, the bronze waits, and we are still listening. The ancient Greek fire grenades. They say there are fires in history that were not born in hearths, nor lit by simple sparks of flint and tinder, but came alive like creatures of another world, flames that hissed and roared and clung to the skin of the sea, as though the ocean itself had been set ablaze, and no hand could put them out. They called it Greek fire, and sometimes they sealed it in jars, clay grenades, fragile to the touch, yet holding within them a secret so powerful, so terrifying, that a single throw could change the course of a battle, could turn the waves into a furnace, could make hardened men fall to their knees in panic as the night itself burned before their eyes. Imagine the deck of a Byzantine warship, the moon overhead, pale and distant, the oars cutting rhythmically through the dark water, the wood groaning with each push, the creak of ropes swaying in the night breeze, the smell of pitch and salt heavy in the air. The men wait in silence, eyes darting to the horizon where the enemy sails approach, hearts beating like drums. And then, the commander raises a hand. From the shadows, soldiers step forward with clay jars, each one small enough to cradle in a single palm, each one sealed tight with wax, each one whispering of the storm it carries inside. They grip them carefully, their knuckles tighten, and when the order comes, they hurl them into the dark. The sound of clay shattering on wood, a hiss, a roar, and suddenly, impossibly, the sea itself is on fire. It is not a normal flame. The chronicles say it burned with a strange brilliance, sometimes flashing green, sometimes glowing red. A fire that seemed alive. A fire that clung to ships like ivy and spread across the water faster than men could fight it. They say the enemy leapt into the waves to escape, but there was no escape, for the flames followed them into the sea, wrapping around bodies like serpents, burning even beneath the surface. Water, the eternal answer to fire, became powerless, became a cruel mirror that reflected the blaze back upon them. What was this thing? Was it alchemy? Was it sorcery? Was it the genius of men, or the fury of the gods? We do not know. We only know the terror it inspired, the awe it demanded, the silence it left in its wake. Think of the workshops where these grenades were made, the low light of oil lamps flickering against stone walls, the air thick with smoke and resin, potters at their wheels, shaping the earth into spheres and jars, their hands wet with clay, their motions steady, practiced, silent. Each vessel was simple, almost humble in appearance, but every curve, every seal, every drying hour in the sun carried the weight of empires. When they were ready, the jars were filled with the secret mixture, a substance so carefully guarded that only a handful of men in all of Byzantium were ever allowed to know its ingredients, a recipe whispered from master to apprentice, bound by oaths, by blood, by fear. Then the grenades were sealed, stored, carried to the docks, stacked on ships as though they were nothing more than wine amphorae, but within them, a storm waited. And when the storm was unleashed, it was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The enemy could prepare for arrows, for swords, for siege engines, for storms of stone and steel. But how do you prepare for fire that will not die, for flames that cling like hungry spirits, that roar as if alive, that turn the very sea into a battlefield of light? The chronicles describe men screaming, shields dropped in panic, sails collapsing in fire, the night sky itself glowing red with the reflection of an inferno that could not be quenched. They called it the wrath of God, the curse of Byzantium, the demon's breath. And though armies had seen fire before, this was no ordinary fire. This was fire that lived. Fragments remain. Archaeologists have uncovered clay spheres in battlefields and ruins, little round grenades with thickened walls, blackened traces inside, vessels that once carried the weapon of empire. To hold one today is to cradle silence, an object small enough to roll in the palm of your hand, but one that once carried terror across oceans, that once burned cities, that once left behind nothing but ash, and yet they are empty now, silent, the secret gone, the fire asleep. Because here is the truth. The Byzantines guarded the recipe more fiercely than any treasure. It was never written down in open text, never carved into stone, never shared with foreign kings. It was held in whispers, in living memory, passed carefully, slowly, until one day, it was lost. Lost to time, lost to history, lost to us. And so all we have left are questions. What was inside those jars? What made the fire cling? What made it roar? What gave it colors like jewels and death alike? We may never know. Perhaps it was science far ahead of its time. Perhaps it was a trick of chemistry we no longer remember, or perhaps it was something stranger, something that does not belong to our age at all. Close your eyes for a moment and listen. Hear the creak of the ship, hear the rhythm of oars striking the sea, smell the salt, the pitch, the fear in the air. Feel the weight of a small clay jar in your hand, cool, fragile, trembling as you raise it high. You know that when you let go, when it leaves your palm, when it breaks upon the enemy's deck, the night will change, the sea will blaze, men will scream, history will remember. And so you throw, the jar shatters, and the world erupts in fire. Because sometimes history is not measured in kings or treaties or marble ruins. Sometimes it is measured in the hiss of clay breaking, in the roar of flames rising, in the secrets we have lost, and in the silence of the night, when the world is quiet, when the waves lap gently against the shore, You can almost imagine it, the hiss, the roar, the sea, on fire. The mochi portrait vessels. There are moments in history when clay ceases to be clay, when earth in the hands of men becomes something far more enduring than stone, something that whispers back across the centuries, with a human face. The mochi culture of ancient Peru left behind one of the most haunting legacies ever shaped by human hands. Not gold, not jewels, not temples that scrape the sky, but vessels, ceramic portraits, faces captured in clay, with such detail, such honesty, that when you look into their eyes, you do not see artifacts, you see people. You see individuals who once breathed, once walked under the same sun, once whispered to one another in the quiet of night. Imagine the workshop, the dim glow of firelight flickering against walls of clay, the sound of hands pressing, smoothing, shaping, as artisans cradle the earth itself in their palms. Each vessel begins as soil taken from the riverbanks, humble and ordinary, but through patience, through skill, through fire, it becomes extraordinary. Not a mask, not a statue, but a vessel that breathes with the likeness of a living person. The moche did not create anonymous faces. They captured wrinkles, scars, crooked noses, broken teeth, eyes that tilt with laughter, lips pressed tight with worry. They made portraits, real people, not idealized gods. And in this choice lies a mystery that runs deeper than gold. Why? Why make such vessels? Why pour so much care, so much precision into clay jars that might carry water, or maize beer, or offerings for the dead? The answer may be buried in silence, but the vessels themselves, they speak. When archaeologists uncovered tombs along the north coast of Peru, they found hundreds of these vessels laid beside the dead, each one a face, each one a life, frozen in time. They are so lifelike, so distinctive, that some scholars believe they represent real individuals, nobles, warriors, priests, or even commoners, elevated through memory. It is as if the Moshe people wanted to carry their community into eternity, vessel by vessel, face by face. Close your eyes and picture them, a line of clay vessels arranged in the shadows of a tomb, their faces lit only by the flickering flame of a torch, dozens of eyes staring back, silent, unblinking, each one different, each one human. There are warriors with helmets, eyes sharp and unyielding. There are elders, their faces lined, sagging with age, every wrinkle pressed carefully into the clay. There are women, serene, their hair bound in braids, lips parted as though about to speak. There are men scarred by illness, by injury, faces that reveal pain as much as dignity. The clay does not flatter, it remembers. And here is the rhythm of the Moshe. Clay, shaped. Clay, dried. Clay, fired in the heat of an earthen kiln, the smoke rising, the vessels glowing red with heat, their faces hardening into permanence, then cooled, lifted carefully, and placed where they were meant to endure, in homes, in ceremonies, in graves. Every step was slow, every step was deliberate, every step was touched by hands that knew clay could outlast flesh. When you stand before these vessels today, in the quiet glass halls of museums, it feels as though the people of the Moshe are still here, still watching, still listening. The vessels are not mute, they speak with their silence. They remind us that the human face has always been sacred, always been the mirror of the soul, and yet, a deeper mystery remains. Were these portraits meant to honor ancestors? Were they funerary guardians? Were they vessels for offerings, or vessels of memory themselves? No one knows. No text explains them. The Moshe left no writing, no books to decode their world. Only clay, only faces. Think of that, an entire culture, silent in words, but loud in clay, and their loudest cry is the human face. Now imagine the funeral of a Moshe noble, the desert wind sweeping across the coast, priests chanting in low, rhythmic tones, the body wrapped in layers of cloth carried down into the chamber, and with him the vessels. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, faces upon faces, lined against the walls, waiting in silence to accompany him into the earth. It must have felt like entering a room full of ancestors, all watching, all present, all waiting. These vessels are not perfect. They are not smooth, polished masks. They are raw, they are textured, they are human, and in that humanity lies their power. Because when you look into their eyes, you feel something stir inside, a recognition, a whisper that says, I was here, I lived, I mattered. And in the quiet of night, when the museums are dark, and the world is asleep, perhaps those faces still speak to one another. Perhaps they still remember the voices of the living. Archaeologists have studied them, measured them, compared them, but no analysis can strip away the mystery. No science can tell us the names behind those faces. No catalog can capture the weight of being stared at by someone who lived 1500 years ago, someone whose laughter or grief has long since turned to dust, yet whose eyes remain, unblinking, unbroken, eternal in clay. The vessels endure, they sit in rows, they stare with patience, and they remind us of something simple, something profound, that the desire to be remembered, to be seen, to leave behind a trace of the self, is one of the oldest human longings. The Moshe understood this, and so they left behind, not only temples, not only treasures, but faces. Think of your own face reflected in still water. Think of the way your features shift with age, with joy, with sorrow. Think of the fragile truth that our bodies do not last forever. And then think of the Moshe, pressing their fingers into wet clay, shaping noses, shaping lips, shaping eyes, so that someone, someday, might look into them and remember. The portrait vessels are not relics of a forgotten people. They are voices. They are mirrors. They are whispers from the earth itself saying, I was here. I am still here. And tonight, as you listen, as your eyes grow heavy, you may almost feel them watching, the faces in clay, the faces in silence, the faces of the Moshe, waiting, remembering, enduring, the Nazca trophy heads. In the dry, endless desert of southern Peru, where the wind whispers across sand that has not shifted for centuries, and where the sun paints the land in unbroken silence, there lies a mystery that is both haunting and intimate, a mystery not drawn across the vast desert floor like the famous Nazca lines, but preserved instead in the fragile remains of human faces, faces that still seem to breathe with a quiet voice of their own. The people of Nazca were skilled artisans, astronomers, and dreamers. They carved giant hummingbirds and monkeys and endless spirals into the desert surface, etching messages so large that only the gods, or perhaps the distant stars, could fully see them. But while their eyes looked skyward, while their hands shaped symbols in stone and earth, they also turned inward, into something far more personal, and it was here, in this hidden practice, that they created what we now call the trophy heads. Imagine for a moment what that means: a human head, carefully severed from the body, not left to decay, not abandoned to dust and time, but prepared, sealed, and preserved with a precision that reveals intent, a deep, deliberate purpose that goes far beyond mere violence or conquest. The lips were often sewn shut with cactus thorns, as though the mouth itself was not to be allowed to speak again in this world, as though the silence of the dead was part of the ritual, and through the forehead, holes were carved, sometimes for cords, sometimes for suspension, so that the heads could be carried, displayed, worn, or placed with care in sacred places. These were not crude trophies, not the reckless spoils of battle, but sacred objects crafted with reverence and persistence, objects that may have carried voices of prayer, or echoes of protection, or whispers to gods who demanded the most intimate offerings of all. Archaeologists look at them and wonder, were they taken from enemies as symbols of power and victory? Were they created from the bodies of beloved kin, their heads preserved not as spoils but as guardians, spirits that would live on, tethered to the living by cords of ritual and belief? Or were they offerings to the desert itself, that vast, unyielding landscape that gave life only when appeased, and demanded sacrifice when ignored? The desert, after all, was everything. It was the land that fed them, the land that starved them, the land that demanded devotion, and in that devotion, the Nazca drew lines on the surface and buried faces beneath it. Close your eyes and let yourself drift into their world. The heat presses down, shimmering in waves across the horizon. The wind cuts like a blade, dry and thin, carrying with it the scent of earth baked for centuries. In the center of this barren stage, a priest kneels, his hands steady, his face painted, holding in his palms a head, prepared, sealed, silent. He raises it to the sky, not as horror, not as cruelty, but as communication. Perhaps he believes that through this head, a message will pass into the next world, to the gods who control the rain, to the forces that rule over life and death. Perhaps he whispers words to it, perhaps he prays, perhaps he believes the soul is still inside, watching, listening, waiting to serve once more. And this is where the rhythm of Nazca life becomes clear. On the surface of the desert, they carved lines large enough to stretch across mountains, drawings so immense that only from the heavens could they truly be seen. And beneath that same desert, they buried the most intimate of offerings, faces, sealed in silence, eyes closed forever. One gesture cosmic, reaching outward to eternity, the other gesture personal, reaching inward to the soul. Two sides of the same people, two voices of the same belief. The heads themselves tell us little, and yet they speak volumes. Some still bear hair, strands that survived the centuries. Some still have skin, dried and preserved by the desert's merciless aridity. And when archaeologists uncovered them, they found not terror, but something quieter, something more complex. These were not symbols of random cruelty. They were symbols of intention, symbols of ritual, symbols of a worldview where life and death were not separate, but part of a single thread, woven together in ways we cannot easily untangle. Think of this as you drift deeper into thought. The Nazca people, long vanished, left us no written words, no clear explanation, only artifacts, only silence. And so we are left to wonder, were these heads messengers to the gods? Were they protectors of the living? Were they proof of victories, or proof of devotion? The desert will not tell us. The heads themselves remain still, and the silence grows deeper. Yet silence is not absence, for the faces endure. They look back at us through time, reminding us that these were people, individuals with names we will never know, with voices we will never hear, and in that reminder lies the greatest power of all, the persistence of memory. The Nazca trophy heads are not simply relics of violence or ritual, they are vessels of humanity, frozen in time, tied forever to the mystery of a people who looked to the sky and buried their secrets beneath the sand. And so, as we close our eyes, we hear the rhythm of the desert, wind against stone, sand across skin, silence wrapped around memory. The Nazca lines stretch outward toward the stars, the trophy heads rest beneath, bound in silence, both eternal, both part of the same story, both whispering to us even now, through the long corridor of time. The Siberian Ice Maiden's tattoo. Beneath the endless steppes of Siberia, where the sky seems to stretch on forever, and the land rolls outward in a silence so deep it feels eternal. Archaeologists uncovered something that felt less like a discovery and more like a story the Earth had been holding on to, waiting, guarding, preserving beneath ice and snow for more than 2,000 years. It was a burial mound, a kurgan hidden beneath frozen soil, and inside its chamber lay a woman, perfectly preserved by the cold, her body untouched by the decay of centuries, her features still recognizable, her presence still commanding even after so much time had passed. She was not just anyone, she was someone who mattered, someone whose life had meaning to her people, someone who, in death, was honored as though her journey into the afterlife required beauty, strength, and ceremony. They call her the Ice Maiden. Her body lay in a coffin of larch wood, surrounded by objects carefully chosen for her passage. She was dressed in clothing finely sewn, adorned with jewelry that shimmered faintly even in the dark, and beside her lay 6 horses, saddled, bridled, and sacrificed, waiting to carry her across whatever journey lay beyond death. These details alone would be enough to mark her as extraordinary, but it was not her coffin, nor her ornaments, nor even her horses that caught the breath of those who discovered her. It was the marks upon her skin, because across her shoulder, curling down her arm, woven into the very flesh of her body, were tattoos. Not the crude marks of survival, not random patterns etched without thought, but deliberate, elegant, living symbols. They were animals both real and imagined, guardians and myths, creatures whose forms still seem alive even now. A stag with antlers spiraling upward in impossible patterns, as though branches of a tree were growing from its skull. A griffin, half lion, half eagle, wings spread wide as though preparing to leap into the sky. Horses, predators, birds of prey, all moving together across her skin, frozen in time yet forever in motion. These tattoos were not decorations, they were statements, they were stories, they were protections. They may have marked her as a priestess, someone who bridged the world of the living and the spirit, someone who carried the myths of her people upon her body so that even in death, those myths remained alive. When she raised her arm, the stag ran with her. When she turned her shoulder, the griffin leapt into flight. Her body was not simply flesh, it was canvas, it was story, it was living belief. Imagine her world, the Siberian steppe, vast and empty, where the horizon stretches in every direction and the sky swallows everything beneath it. Winters long and merciless, summers brief and fragile. The people who lived here, the Pazyryk, were nomads, travelers bound to the land, riding across plains on horseback, wrapped in furs, surviving by skill, instinct, and tradition. In such a harsh life, every symbol mattered, every mark carried weight, every story was a thread holding a people together. And so, when we look at the Ice Maiden's tattoos, we are not just looking at art, we are looking at survival, at protection, at myth made flesh. Perhaps these creatures were guardians meant to protect her soul as it traveled into the afterlife. Perhaps they were prayers, etched into her body so that the gods could see them even when the voice was silent. Perhaps they were her people's legends, recorded not on paper, not on stone, but on skin, because skin is the most personal place for a story to live. Think of this. Even now, thousands of years later, we still tattoo ourselves. We mark our bodies with names, faces, symbols of love, loss, strength, memory. It is an instinct older than writing, older than kingdoms, older than history itself. The Ice Maiden proves that long before we were building cities, long before we were carving books, humans were carving themselves. Her tattoos are not just art, they are proof of our desire to carry meaning upon our skin, to make our very bodies vessels of story. The cold kept her safe, the ice preserved what time would have stolen, and so, when she was uncovered, she was not just a body, she was a message, she was a reminder, she was a voice from the past, still whispering across the centuries. Her tattoos, vivid and alive even after 2 millennia, are not silent, they move, they breathe, they call to us. A stag that never stops running, a griffin that never lands, myths that never die. The Siberian Ice Maiden may rest in silence, but her tattoos still speak. They remind us that even in the coldest of places, even in the silence of death, humans leave behind warmth, they leave behind beauty, they leave behind stories etched not only in stone, not only in books, but in themselves. And that perhaps is why she matters most, because in her skin, preserved by ice, we see not only her story, but our own. The Indus Valley Amulets. In the heat and dust of the Indian subcontinent, long before the pyramids of Egypt rose high into the desert sky, long before the great palaces of Mesopotamia took form along the rivers of Tigris and Euphrates, there thrived a civilization that the world almost forgot, the Indus Valley. A world of brick cities laid out in patterns so precise, so careful, so deliberate, that even today, urban planners pause to wonder how such order was achieved thousands of years ago. Streets aligned with care, homes fitted with wells, drainage systems so advanced that it would take humanity centuries to rediscover their design. And among these cities, Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dhalavira, there were objects small enough to fit in a child's palm, yet powerful enough to whisper across millennia, amulets. Tiny shapes of stone, clay, faience, and metal, carved with images that still defy simple explanation. Animals with curling horns, figures with outstretched arms, symbols that may be writing, or may be magic, or may be something we cannot yet understand. Hold one of these amulets in your hand, and you are touching something worn by someone thousands of years ago. Not a king, not a priest, not a warrior, remembered in legend, but perhaps a woman keeping it on a cord around her neck, or a child clutching it tightly, or a man carrying it with him as he traded goods across rivers and mountains. The amulets are small, but they carry within them enormous questions. Were they charms for protection? Were they tokens of faith, reminders of gods whose names have long been lost to us? Were they identification seals, marks of belonging, proof of family or trade? Or were they, as some believe, pieces of a script, fragments of a language still waiting for its voice to be heard? Because here lies the mystery. The Indus Valley left behind thousands of inscriptions, carved in tiny strokes on seals and amulets, and yet we cannot read them. To this day their script is undeciphered. The symbols line up in neat patterns, repeated often enough to feel like language, and yet alien enough that no one can unlock their grammar. Every attempt at reading them leads only to more silence. So imagine this: a woman in Harappa places an amulet into her child's hand. She tells him it will keep him safe, that the figure of the bull carved upon it is strong, that its horns will guard him from harm. A priest in Mohenjo-Daro ties a seal around his waist, the engraved symbol calling upon a god whose form has long been forgotten, his faith woven into the lines of the carving. A trader tucks one into his pouch, crossing rivers and deserts, believing that the animal etched into the clay will protect his journey. Each amulet carried meaning then, and each carries mystery now. The animals chosen were not random. Bulls, elephants, tigers, unicorn-like creatures with a single horn. Were these real animals or mythic ones? Did the single-horned beast represent power, or purity, or something else entirely? We cannot ask the Indus people. Their voices are gone, but their hands carved these figures carefully, repeating them again and again, as though they mattered more than words. And perhaps that is the secret. The amulets may not have been words at all. They may have been prayers. Think of the rhythm of daily life in the Indus Valley, the river flowing past fields of barley and wheat, the sound of wheels rolling over stone streets, the hum of voices in the market, trading beads, shells, cotton, spices. Among it all, someone reaches into their pocket, touches an amulet, and feels safe. The way we touch a locket today, the way some hold a cross, a rosary, or a charm bracelet. The instinct is the same. The need for something small to hold meaning is eternal. The Indus Valley amulets remind us of that need. They are not silent curiosities. They are echoes of belief, carried in pockets and tied around necks, lost in the earth, waiting for centuries until we found them again. And here is the beauty. Though their script cannot be read, their silence speaks. It tells us that humans everywhere, no matter the age, no matter the place, sought meaning beyond survival. They wanted symbols. They wanted protection. They wanted beauty they could hold close. So tonight, as you listen, let your mind drift to those ancient cities. See the streets laid out like a grid, clean and careful. See the children running, the traders calling, the potters shaping clay. See the river Indus flowing quietly, carrying boats across its calm waters. And then see the amulets, tiny, simple, powerful, a bull carved on one, an elephant pressed into another, a figure seated cross-legged, hands upon knees, perhaps a god, perhaps a man, perhaps both. They may not speak in words we understand, but they speak in something older than words, in symbols, in rhythm, in faith. The Indus Valley amulets are fragments of a forgotten language, but they are also fragments of the human heart, and as long as they survive, their silence will never be empty. It will be a silence full of meaning, waiting for us to listen. The Skara Brae stone furniture. There are places in the world where time does not simply pass. It lingers. It rests like mist on the stones. It waits patiently, holding secrets that whisper only to those willing to listen. One such place lies on a small, windswept island off the northern coast of Scotland, the Orkney Islands. Here, Battered by salt winds and the restless sea, lie the ruins of a village older than the pyramids of Egypt, older than Stonehenge, older than almost any home you can still walk through today. Skara Brae. Imagine it, 8 houses, buried for thousands of years beneath layers of sand and earth, preserved so perfectly that when they were uncovered by a storm in the 1800s, it was as if the villagers had only just stepped outside. Their hearths still sat in the center, their stone beds still lined the walls, their cupboards, shelves, and storage boxes, carved entirely from stone, stood waiting, silent, but ready. It is the stone furniture of Skara Brae that captures the imagination, because here, in this remote corner of the world, 5,000 years ago, people carved their lives directly into rock. They did not bring wood, they did not carry wealth. They shaped the very bones of the earth into tables, into beds, into shelves where they kept their treasures. Stone, cold and unyielding, and yet in their hands, stone became home. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine stepping inside one of those houses. The walls curve around you, thick with stone, sheltering against the wind. In the center, a hearth glows faintly, embers, glowing orange, smoke curling upward through a hole in the roof. To one side you see a bed built of stone slabs, once covered with straw and animal skins, where a family might have lain together against the cold. Beside it, a small box carved from stone, set into the floor, perhaps filled with fish, grain, or tools. And on the wall, a shelf, stone again, lined with shells, beads, and tiny carved ornaments. A home, but a home so old that it feels more like a dream than a memory. The furniture of Skara Brae is more than just furniture. It is a message. It tells us of lives lived with care. It tells us of a people who, though distant in time, were not so different from us. They too gathered around the warmth of a fire. They too wanted places to store their food, to display their precious objects, to rest their bodies at night. The rhythm of living has not changed. Only the centuries have passed. But there is also mystery. Who were the people of Skara Brae? Why did they build here, at the edge of the sea? And why, after centuries of life, did they leave? Some say it was the encroaching tides. Some say storms grew too fierce, or crops too thin. Others believe disease or conflict may have driven them away. We cannot know. We walk through their stone houses today, but we do not hear their voices. And yet, those stone beds and shelves still speak. They whisper that life was organized, that families lived in order, that there was comfort even in a world of hardship. That even 5,000 years ago, people shaped their homes, not only for survival, but for belonging. Imagine a child, curling into a stone bed, staring at the firelight dancing on the walls. Imagine a woman arranging shells upon a stone shelf, each one gleaming softly, perhaps a gift from the sea, perhaps a token of memory. Imagine a man placing tools carefully inside a stone box, knowing he would need them again tomorrow. These small acts are universal. They belong not just to Skara Brae, but to all of us. And so, when you stand in those ancient houses today, you feel something unexpected. You feel that these people are not lost to time. They are right here, in the arrangement of a room, in the curve of a shelf, in the way stone was shaped to suit human need. The winds howl outside, the sea crashes against the shore, but inside those stone homes, there is a stillness, a rhythm, a sense of life, that never left. And perhaps, that is why Skara Brae touches the soul so deeply, because it reminds us that no matter how far back you go, humans have always wanted the same things: warmth, shelter, food, family, and a place to set down the objects that matter most. The stone furniture of Skara Brae is not just ancient archaeology, it is a reminder that human hearts have always been the same, and as you drift tonight, let that thought carry you. That thousands of years ago, on a windswept island, people lay their heads down on stone beds, kept their treasures on stone shelves, and warmed their hands by fires in stone hearths, just as we rest, and keep, and warm ourselves today. The story of Skara Brae is not just the story of the past, it is the story of the home, and the home is eternal. The Ajanta musical instruments fresco. There are walls in this world that do not simply hold stone upon stone, walls that seem to breathe, walls that seem to whisper. High in the basalt cliffs of western India, carved out by hand, there is such a place, Ajanta. The caves of Ajanta are not ordinary caves. They are sanctuaries. They are temples. They are, in their own way, living books, where every wall, every brushstroke, every carved column tells a story. And among these stories, painted in glowing mineral colors that still shine after more than 1,000 years, there is one that does not just speak to the eyes, it sings to the soul. It is the fresco of music, the Ajanta fresco of instruments and musicians, a mural that freezes, in pigments and plaster, the very sound of a vanished age. Step inside, in your mind. The cave is dim, only a few oil lamps flicker against the walls. The air is cool, carrying the faint scent of earth and age. Before you, the fresco comes alive. Painted figures stand with instruments in hand. Lutes, drums, flutes, cymbals, dancers sway with painted limbs. Singers open their mouths mid-chant, and though all of it is silent, somehow you can almost hear it. The lute strums softly, a river of notes flowing beneath the voices. The drums mark a steady pulse, like a heartbeat, echoing against the cave's stone. The flute cries out, high and clear, like wind weaving through trees. And the cymbals clash lightly, like bells calling the mind to attention. Close your eyes. Can you hear it? The music of Ajanta, a rhythm that once filled these halls, and lingers still. This is more than art. This is more than paint. The fresco is memory, a memory of devotion, celebration, worship, and joy. For the caves of Ajanta were not simply places to hide from the sun. They were temples to the Buddha, sanctuaries of prayer, halls of chanting, and music was woven into every ritual. It was not background, it was offering. Every note, every sound, every voice carried upward as devotion. Imagine a monk sitting cross-legged in the corner, chanting softly, while a drum beat marked the rhythm. Imagine pilgrims resting in the cave after long journeys, soothed not only by the paintings but by the music they represented. Imagine the painter himself, dipping his brush in ochre and lapis, humming the very tune he was trying to capture forever in color. In Ajanta, the walls were alive. They were not silent stone, they vibrated with rhythm. They absorbed the sound of flutes and chants, and they still seemed to hold it. Look closer at the fresco. You will see the instruments of a world long past. Slender stringed instruments, ancestors of the sitar. Hand drums, struck with open palms, echoing the heartbeat of earth. Flutes, carved from reeds or bamboo, light and airy. Cymbals and bells, sharp and bright, breaking through the steady flow. These were not just tools for entertainment. They were sacred objects. They were bridges between silence and the divine, between human longing and something greater. Because music has always been more than sound. It is feeling, it is spirit, it is the invisible current that moves through us. And here, in Ajanta, that current has been painted into eternity. Think of it like this: the walls themselves are singing, not in sound but in memory, not to the ear but to the heart. When you stand before this fresco, you feel it. The cave hums. The silence carries a rhythm. The air itself seems to breathe. And you realize, music never truly dies. It only changes form. It becomes echo. It becomes image. It becomes memory. In Ajanta, it became paint. Now drift deeper into the scene. The hall is lit with oil lamps. The walls glow with reds, with golds, with greens. The figures shimmer in the dancing flame. And you are seated among them. The drummers begin softly, a slow heartbeat. The strings join in, weaving a gentle river of sound. The flutes rise, lifting the air like birds taking flight. Voices enter, chanting in harmony, circling the space like waves of the sea. You close your eyes. The rhythm carries you. The sound does not rush. It flows, it sways, it lulls. It is not performance, it is prayer. And as you listen, you realize this fresco is not frozen at all. It is still moving, still alive, still singing. Centuries have passed since these halls last echoed with real music. The singers are gone, the instruments are silent, the dancers are dust, but the fresco remains, and in its silence, you can still hear the song. Because music is eternal, because rhythm cannot be buried, because even stone can remember. The Ajanta fresco reminds us that art does not just capture what we see, it captures what we feel, it captures what we hear, it captures what we love. And tonight, as you drift deeper, slower, softer, the walls of Ajanta are still singing. The drum is your heartbeat, the flute is your breath, the strings are your thoughts, flowing like a river, the chant is your rest, guiding you into silence. Ajanta's music is still here, not on walls, not in caves, but within you, and like a lullaby painted in stone, it carries you gently, endlessly, into dreams. The Thonis Heraclean stone stele. Beneath the restless waters of the Mediterranean Sea, where waves roll endlessly above hidden sands, there lies a city that for centuries belonged to legend. A city once called Thonis by the Egyptians and Heraclean by the Greeks. For 1,000 years it was whispered about in scrolls and myths, spoken of as a port where gods walked among men, a place of sacred temples, busy harbors, and voices carried on the salt air. And yet, it vanished. No trace, no ruins, no broken stones upon the land. Only silence, and the doubt of historians who thought perhaps it had never existed at all, until the divers came, until the sea itself released its secrets. And among those secrets, among statues and scattered coins, among columns tumbled in the sand, they found something that still spoke, a great slab of stone. The Thonis Heraclean stele. It stands taller than a man, its surface weathered, but still alive with hieroglyphs carved by ancient hands. It was a decree of Pharaoh Nectanebo I, etched in the 4th century before Christ. Imagine the chisels striking against stone, craftsmen working by torchlight, letters forming, messages meant not only for the people, but for the gods themselves. It was once raised high in a temple, so that priests and citizens might see it, read it, obey it. It carried authority, not just as writing, but as the very voice of the pharaoh. And then, like the city it guarded, it was swallowed by the sea. For centuries, the stone lay beneath shifting tides and drifting sand. Salt water lapped against its surface. Fish darted by in silence, and still the words endured. Divers in the year 2000 described the moment of its discovery. The seabed was stirred, the clouds of sand parted, and there it was, standing upright, as though waiting, as though guarding a temple that no longer stood. They ran their hands across it, they traced the grooves of the hieroglyphs. And in that moment, it was as if the pharaoh himself had reached across 2,000 years to whisper once again. The stela tells us about offerings, about temple rites, about the privileges of the priests of Amon-Gareb, but beyond its words lies something greater, proof that this was no legend, that Heracleion was real, that ships came here, laden with grain, with wine, with treasure, that temples rose high above the harbor, that faith and trade intertwined at the mouth of the Nile. Proof, carved in stone, surviving when all else was lost. Close your eyes, and picture it. The harbor at dawn, the sea shimmering gold beneath the sun, ships swaying gently at anchor, their hulls heavy with goods, merchants shouting, sailors carrying amphorae across wooden planks, priests in white linen walking through temple courtyards. And there, in the heart of it all, stood the stele, raised in reverence, letters deep and dark in the fresh-cut stone, a message of law, of order, of devotion. Generations passed before it, hands touched it, eyes read it, voices recited the words aloud. And then, calamity came. Whether by earthquake, flood, or the slow creeping hand of the sea, the city sank, streets vanished, walls crumbled, the temple fell. But the stele remained. There is something haunting in this. A city of thousands erased, yet a single slab of stone survived, its message unbroken. The sea can be cruel, it swallows whole civilizations, but sometimes it chooses to preserve. Like a careful keeper, it covered the stele with layers of sand, protecting the words from erosion, shielding the edges from harm, so that, centuries later, when humanity was ready, the stone would be found again. Today, when you stand before it, whether in the museum halls or in photographs, you do not see only stone, you see authority, carved in lines that have outlived empires. Rome has risen and fallen, the caliphates have come and gone, nations have been born and dissolved, but the words of Pharaoh Nectanebo, cut deep into granite, still remain. And when you gaze upon them, there is a strange feeling, a sense that you are not looking at something dead, but something alive. The decree is still here, the voice is still speaking, but the stele is different. The stele is not silent, it speaks, it commands, it carries not only beauty, but authority. It reminds us that this was not just a port of trade, but a city of faith, a city of law, a city where God and man walk together. And so the Thonis, Heracleion stele becomes more than an artifact. It is a bridge between myth and reality, between the drowned past and the living present, between silence and sound. The letters carved upon it still breathe, the stone still holds the weight of command. The sea, though it buried the city, could not bury the voice. So as you drift now in the rhythm of this story, picture the waters of the Mediterranean swaying gently overhead. Imagine the ruins below, pillars fallen, statues broken, streets empty, silent, and among them, a single stone still upright. A stele that has waited patiently through centuries of darkness, through centuries of silence, for eyes to see it again. The city may be gone, its people may be gone, but the words remain. The Thonis, Heracleion stele whispers still, soft, steady, eternal. The Muisca Tunjo figures. High in the emerald mountains of Colombia, where clouds crawl low and rivers carve ancient valleys, there lies a story, not written in books, not carved into stone, but whispered into the water itself. It is the story of tiny golden figures, known as tunjos. At first glance, they seem so small, so delicate, almost insignificant. Yet within those little shapes, the Muisca people carried prayers, dreams, fears, and entire conversations with the divine. But why would a civilization pour so much effort into objects they would never keep? Why would they cast figures in pure gold, gold that shimmered like condensed sunlight, only to let them vanish forever beneath the surface of lakes and rivers? The answer is both simple and profoundly mysterious. The Muisca saw the world not as divided into heaven and earth, but as layered, interwoven, connected. To them, water was not merely water. Lakes were not just landscapes. They were portals. They were sacred mirrors. They were the skin of the earth, behind which lay the invisible realm of spirits and gods. And so, when they shaped gold into little figures, they were not creating ornaments. They were not decorating their homes. They were not storing wealth. They were crafting messages, condensed offerings of faith. A tunjo was not meant to be owned. It was meant to be surrendered. Picture the scene. A night lit only by torches, their flames dancing in the cool mountain air. Priests and chiefs stand near the black stillness of Lake Guatavita. Drums echo like distant thunder, steady and slow, as if imitating the heartbeat of the earth itself. In the priest's hand rests a tunjo, perhaps a tiny warrior, perhaps a mother and child, perhaps an animal caught between the real and the mythical. The figure glows faintly orange from the firelight, and then, with ritual words spoken softly into the night, it is cast into the water. You can almost hear the sound, the sharp hiss of gold breaking the lake's surface, the widening ripples, the slow spiral downward into silence. That was the prayer. That was the offering. That was the mystery. Now ask yourself, how many figures were dropped into these waters over centuries? How many prayers? How many secrets? How many golden whispers are still sleeping beneath the mud? Some say thousands. Others say tens of thousands. And here comes the curiosity. What did each one mean? Were they offerings for protection in war? Were they requests for healing, for good harvests, for safe childbirth? Were they thanks, gratitude, or even bargains with the gods? Or could some of them have been warnings? Silent messages left not for the divine, but for the future, for us to find? When the Spanish arrived, they saw none of this. They could not imagine gold being anything but treasure. To them, each tunjo was money, power, empire. They heard whispers of a chief, covered in gold dust, rowing into the middle of a lake, casting treasures into the depths. And from this, they built the legend of El Dorado. Not a ritual, not a belief, but a city of endless gold. They drained lakes. They tore into sacred places. They recovered some figures, yes, but the deeper mystery escaped them. Because El Dorado was never about wealth, it was about light, it was about faith, it was about the act of giving something away forever. And here's where the story becomes almost unbearable in its curiosity. Archaeologists have recovered some tunjos, tiny, intricate, haunting, a warrior with sharp features, a bird that seems ready to take flight, a frog poised mid-leap, a human figure with arms outstretched, reaching for something unseen. When you hold one, it feels less like holding an artifact, and more like holding a question. Why this figure? Why this design? Why this moment? Each tunjo feels like a frozen voice, a prayer you can almost hear, but never fully understand. And the more you study them, the more you realize you are not supposed to fully understand. Because not all prayers are meant to be translated. Some are meant to remain between human and divine. Now let the thought linger. How many tunjos still rest beneath the waters? How many are buried beneath centuries of silt, unseen, untouched? Do they still whisper? Do they still radiate the intentions of the people who made them? And here's the haunting part. What if they were never meant to be found at all? What if pulling them from the depths is like pulling words from a prayer, tearing them out of the silence where they belong? Close your eyes. Imagine standing on the shore of Lake Guatavita tonight. The air is heavy, the mist drifts low, the water is still. Somewhere below your feet, thousands of tiny golden figures rest. Each one a story, each one a soul, each one glowing faintly in the dark, though no light can touch them now. And you realize you are standing above a golden library, a library not of books but of faith, and yet its shelves can never be opened. That is the story of the Muisca Tunjos. Not wealth, not treasure, but endless questions, golden mysteries that sleep in silence and speak only through wonder. The Sardinian obsidian blades. Far out in the Mediterranean Sea, on the rugged island of Sardinia, there lies a mystery carved not in stone, nor in bronze, but in volcanic glass. Dark, sharp, shimmering like frozen midnight. These are the obsidian blades of Sardinia. At first glance they seem simple. Tools, weapons, shards of stone shaped by human hands. But when you hold one against the light, when you feel its edge, still sharper than surgical steel even after thousands of years, you realize this is no ordinary relic. These blades were more than survival. They were more than craft. They were an entire network of exchange, a currency of trust, and perhaps a key to mysteries we still cannot fully name. Because Sardinia was no isolated island. From as early as 6,000 years ago, obsidian traveled. Pieces from Sardinia's ancient quarries have been found far from its shores, in Italy, in France, in the distant lands across the sea. How did they move? Who carried them? Were they traded with strangers across vast waters? Or did obsidian itself carry a sacred meaning that made it worth the risk of long voyages? Imagine it. A small boat carved from wood rocking on the waves of the Mediterranean. Inside, a bundle of obsidian blades gleaming faintly in the sunlight. Not gold, not silver, but to those who received them, perhaps even more valuable. Why? Because obsidian was fire made solid. It was the earth's volcanic breath, cooled into glass, and to shape it was to hold both destruction and creation in your hands. Picture an ancient craftsman. A rough block of obsidian rests before him. He strikes it, carefully, precisely. Flakes split away like dark petals, each one razor thin, and slowly, a blade emerges. Its edge is so sharp, it can slice through flesh with the faintest touch. Its surface gleams like black water, reflecting firelight in ripples. To shape a blade like this was not just labor, it was almost ritual. Because obsidian can shatter at the wrong angle, crack with one careless strike. It requires patience, skill, almost a conversation between human and stone. And so, when we see these Sardinian blades today, We are not just looking at tools, we are looking at the fingerprints of thought, of skill, of intention, frozen in volcanic glass. But here is where curiosity deepens. Some blades were practical, yes. They cut wood, they butchered animals, they carved. But others seemed too fine, too perfect, too ceremonial to have ever touched ordinary life. Some were polished, refined, crafted almost like jewelry. Why make something so sharp, so fragile, only to set it aside? Could they have been ritual offerings, symbols of power, gifts between tribes? Or perhaps they were talismans, carried not for use, but for meaning, like carrying a piece of lightning in your pocket. And then there is the trade. Obsidian, from Sardinia, traveled hundreds, even thousands of kilometers, across waves, across mountains, across cultures. And yet in each place, it carried its identity. Even today, scientists can trace the chemical fingerprint of a blade and say, yes, this one was born of Sardinia's volcanic earth. Think of that for a moment. A shard of black glass, no bigger than your hand, journeying further than many people of its time ever dreamed. Silent, unchanging, unbroken. What stories did it pass through? What hands touched it? What eyes widened as it was revealed? And then comes the most human question of all. Did those who gave it away know what they were giving? Did they see obsidian as mere trade? Or did they see it as a piece of their homeland, a piece of their fire, carried into the hands of strangers? And what did the strangers think when they held it? Did they see a tool, or did they see something almost magical, the Earth's own dark mirror, sharper than anything they had ever known? Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine walking through the rocky landscapes of ancient Sardinia. You stumble upon a cave. Inside you see piles of obsidian flakes, scattered on the floor, glittering faintly in the light. It is not just a workshop, it is a memory, a frozen moment of someone, thousands of years ago, shaping glass into survival, and perhaps shaping survival into meaning. And then you step back, and you realize, this was not just one cave, not just one workshop. This was a network, a web. Sardinia's obsidian spread like veins of fire across the ancient world, and so the blades whisper to us, not of war, not of blood, but of journeys, of exchanges, of human connection. Each blade is a question, each shard is a fragment of a story, and the more we gather, the more we realize, this was not just stone, this was the beginning of something far greater, the first sparks of trade, of culture, of shared humanity. That is the mystery of the Sardinian obsidian blades. Not treasure, not weapon, but a story that cut across seas, a story still sharp, still gleaming, still waiting for us to listen. The Celtic Gundestrup cauldron. There are objects in history that shine like quiet lighthouses in the night of the past. They are not just artifacts, they are doorways, and when you stand before them, you don't simply see metal or stone. You feel a presence, as though the hands of those who once believed, once prayed, once sacrificed, are still there. The Gundestrup cauldron is one of those objects, found in the soil of Denmark, forged far away, in lands that do not share its burial place, covered with images that speak in riddles. It is not merely a vessel, it is a story, a myth, a question without an answer. Picture it, a massive silver cauldron, built from richly decorated plates, its walls alive with carvings that shimmer when firelight dances across them, every surface filled with figures, humans, animals, gods, a silver canvas carrying scenes that scholars still struggle to interpret. And yet, even if you knew nothing about archaeology, nothing about the Celts, nothing about religion or ritual, you would still feel it. You would feel that this was no ordinary thing. It was made to be looked at, to be revered, to be part of ceremonies where mortal life brushed against the divine. On one plate, a god with antlers sits cross-legged. His hands hold a serpent and a torque, the twisted collar of Celtic nobility. This is Cernunnos, perhaps, the lord of wild things. His eyes are calm, his posture serene, and yet from him radiates power, quiet, unyielding, eternal. On another plate, a great bull is surrounded by men, not hunted, not butchered, but honored, as though the bull itself was divine, a bridge between this world and another. Other panels show warriors, animals, faces of gods half forgotten. Each panel tells a fragment of a story, but when you put them all together, the story remains incomplete, like listening to a song where verses are missing, like hearing a dream recited by someone who has just woken, their memory already fading. Close your eyes. Imagine this cauldron not in a museum, not behind glass, but in its prime. A hall lit by torches, the smoke rising, the chanting low and rhythmic. At the center, the silver vessel gleaming, its figures glowing as the fire dances. Warriors watch. Priests intone words now lost. Hands are lifted, heads bowed. The cauldron is not touched casually. It is not an object. It is an altar, a mirror of belief, a vessel of mystery. But here is the puzzle. The Gundestrup cauldron was not made in Denmark. Its style, its silver, its craftsmanship, Everything points to Thrace, in modern-day Bulgaria, or perhaps further east, and yet it was buried in a Danish bog. How did it travel so far? Who carried it, and why? Was it a gift from kings? A treasure looted in war? A relic carried by migrating tribes, always guarded, always revered? And then at the end of its journey, why bury it? Why hide it in the earth, never to be seen again? Some say it was an offering to the gods, a farewell gift to the spirits of the land. Others say it was hidden to protect it, a treasure placed away during a time of fear, never retrieved. But the truth is silence, and silence can be more powerful than answers. For in Celtic myth, cauldrons are not just vessels, they are symbols. They can feed armies without ever emptying. They can heal the wounded. They can bring the dead back to life. They are thresholds between this world and the other world. So when the Gundestrup cauldron was made, was it believed to hold that power? Did those who touched it believe they were touching the very skin of eternity? Imagine dipping water from it. Imagine drinking from it. In ritual, in prayer, the taste would not just be of water or wine. It would be the taste of something deeper, a taste of myth. This cauldron is over 2,000 years old. Think of the countless lives that came and went as it lay buried. Think of the kings who ruled, the wars that raged, the civilizations that rose and fell. And yet beneath the bog, it waited, silent, untouched, as if the earth itself was guarding it, keeping it safe for a time when we might be ready to see it again. And when it was uncovered, it did not speak in a language we understood. It spoke in symbols. It spoke in silence. It spoke in mystery. Look closer. Each plate is a meditation. A god with antlers, reminding us of balance between wildness and peace. A bull, reminding us of strength, sacrifice, and offering. A line of warriors, reminding us of duty, of community, of struggle. A horned serpent, coiled, reminding us of the eternal cycle of life and death. It is not one story. It is a tapestry of many. And like all tapestries, the threads cannot be separated. They must be read together, even if we cannot fully understand them. So tonight, as you rest, let the Gundestrup cauldron be in your thoughts. Picture its silver plates glowing in firelight. Picture the faces of gods staring back, timeless, calm. Picture the quiet hum of a hall, the voices chanting words you do not know, but somehow, you feel. Picture the earth slowly covering it, as centuries pass, as ages change. Picture the silence of the bog, heavy, eternal, holding the cauldron like a secret, and then picture its rediscovery. The moment when light once again touched its surface after 2,000 years of sleep. Imagine the astonishment of those who saw it. Not just an artifact, but a messenger, a fragment of a forgotten world, reaching out to us across time. The Gundestrup cauldron is more than silver. It is memory, it is ritual, it is myth hammered into shape, and though we cannot fully know its meaning, we can feel its presence, we can listen to its silence, we can let its mystery carry us gently into dreams. The Etruscan Purgi tablets. There are discoveries in history that feel almost too delicate to belong to this world. Small, fragile, yet powerful enough to reshape how we see entire civilizations. The Purgi tablets are like that. They are not massive monuments, thin, inscribed with words, and yet they carry a voice that has traveled across 25 centuries. Close your eyes. Imagine the coast of Italy, long before Rome rose to dominance. Picture a harbor called Purgi, where ships from across the Mediterranean arrived, carrying goods, carrying people, carrying beliefs. It was a place of exchange, a place of encounters, a place where languages touched like waves meeting on the shore. And there, in the 6th century BCE, a sanctuary was built, a temple dedicated to the goddess Uni, sister to the Roman Juno, twin to the Greek Hera. And within that sanctuary, an offering was made. 3 golden tablets, a message in 2 languages, a prayer, a declaration, a whisper of faith, hammered into precious metal. Now pause. Think of the hands that made them. Goldsmiths bending over sheets of glowing metal, their tools delicate, their work steady. Each line of text pressed carefully, letter by letter, word by word. The words were not meant for casual eyes. They were meant for the goddess. They were meant to last. They were meant to last. They were meant to shine long after their makers had turned to dust. 2 of the tablets carry the words in the Etruscan tongue, a language that has never fully yielded its secrets, a language like smoke, partly visible, partly gone. The 3rd carries the same message in Phoenician, a language of sailors, traders, priests, a language that traveled with ships across the sea. Together, the 3 tablets form a bridge, one language known, one language lost, and in between them, a golden key. For through them, scholars today can step closer to the Etruscans, a people whose world was rich, complex, vibrant, yet whose voice is almost entirely gone. Picture this, a priest in white robes standing before the temple at Purgi. In his hands the shining sheets of gold. He raises them to the light, the sun catching every curve of the letters, and he speaks, not just to the people gathered, not just to the sailors watching from the harbor, but to Uni herself, the goddess who sees beyond. The words are a dedication from King the Fairy Velianus. He honors the goddess, he promises loyalty, he binds his name and his city to her care. These are not casual words, they are solemn, sacred, a covenant between the mortal and the divine. Now let the rhythm slow. The Purgi tablets remind us of something we forget too easily, that the greatest treasures are not always the grandest. Sometimes they fit in the palm of a hand, sometimes they are thin enough to bend, and yet, within them, they carry entire worlds. The Etruscans were once a mighty people. They built cities. They traded with Greeks, with Phoenicians, with Carthaginians. They shaped early Rome. Their art was alive with color, their tombs painted with dances and banquets, their rituals filled with mystery. And yet, when Rome grew, the Etruscans faded. Their language disappeared. Their gods were folded into Roman names. Their memory dissolved. But the Purgi tablets remained. Think of the journey of those little sheets of gold, buried in the earth for centuries, untouched as empires rose and fell, hidden as languages were born and languages died, silent as the world moved on. And then, in 1964, they were found. Archaeologists brushed away the soil, and there, gleaming faintly in the dim light, the golden tablets emerged. Words that had slept for 2,500 years finally awoke. Let yourself linger there. The Purgi tablets are not just artifacts. They are voices. They are fragments of prayer, fragments of faith. They remind us that the ancients were not distant or strange. They prayed, they promised, they hoped, just as we do now. Their words may be in languages we struggle to read, but the feeling behind them, loyalty, devotion, awe, needs no translation. Imagine the slow, steady breathing of the sea at Purgi, the sound of waves against the shore, the smell of salt and wood from ships, the flicker of firelight on temple walls. And in the center, 3 golden tablets gleaming softly, carrying the words of a king to his goddess. Now imagine the silence after, the centuries of silence, no chanting, no prayers, just earth, pressing down, just time, folding over, until at last we hear them again. And that, perhaps, is the greatest gift of the Purgi tablets. Not the gold, not the inscriptions, but the reminder that words can travel through time, that faith can linger, that even when languages are lost, the human longing behind them survives. They are in a way like a lullaby sung long ago, still faintly echoing, soft, gentle, eternal. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, carry this image with you. 3 small sheets of gold, a king's hand pressing letters into them, a goddess's name shining in the light, a harbor filled with the sounds of distant voices, and beyond all of it, silence, the kind of silence that holds memory, the kind of silence that feels alive, the kind of silence that waits until we are ready to listen again. The Muisca Golden Raft. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself high in the Andes of Colombia. The air is cool here, thin and clear. The mountains rise around you like silent guardians, and in the hollow of the valley, there is a lake, still, quiet, almost breathing. This is Lake Guatavita. To the Muisca people, it was not simply water, it was sacred, a place where the veil between worlds felt thin, a place where the gods were listening. Now, imagine a ceremony, a ritual unlike any other. At dawn, when the first light touched the water, a man was chosen, a chief, a leader. He would step forward, his body covered in gold dust, every inch of his skin glowing like sunlight made flesh. The people called him the Golden One. Picture him standing there, on a raft made of reeds, floating gently toward the center of the lake. Around him stood priests and attendants, figures dressed in fine cloth, carrying offerings of emeralds and gold, sacred treasures that shimmered in the morning light. The crowd waited at the shore, thousands of them, the air thick with smoke from burning torches, the steady rhythm of drums beating in the distance, a rhythm like a heartbeat, like the pulse of the earth itself. Slowly the raft drifted farther from the shore. The lake mirrored the sky. Mist curled above the water, as if the gods themselves were leaning close to watch. And then, at the very center of the lake, the Golden One stood tall. He raised his arms, he took a breath, and he dove. Gold dust scattered, falling like stars into the deep. Treasures followed, emeralds flashing green before vanishing into darkness. Golden figures slipping away, swallowed by the sacred waters. The people on the shore fell silent. What they witnessed was not wealth wasted, it was wealth returned to the gods who gave life, who gave power, who gave breath. Now pause, let yourself sit with that image. A golden man, shining and then vanishing beneath the surface. The lake swallowing treasures like secrets, the people waiting in reverence, the silence afterward, not emptiness, but fulfillment. It is this ritual, this moment, that the Muisca Golden Raft captures. The artifact itself is small, you could hold it in your hands, but within its golden lines, the entire ceremony lives. The chief stands at the center, his figure crafted in shining detail. Around him, attendants hold their places, their gestures frozen in delicate metal. The raft supports them all, a golden stage for a sacred story. When you look at it, you don't just see gold, you see movement, you see ritual, you see faith. To the Muisca, gold was never about riches. It was not coins, not power to hoard. Gold was the skin of the gods. It was sunlight you could touch. It was the very essence of life. And so to wear gold was to become divine. To cover your body in gold dust was to become light itself. The Golden One was not only a man, he was a living prayer. Think of this difference. The Spanish conquistadors came later, searching endlessly for El Dorado. They imagined entire cities gleaming with golden walls, kingdoms built from treasure, a world paved in wealth. But they misunderstood. El Dorado was never a place. It was never a city. It was this. A man made golden, offering light back to the water. A ritual repeated for generations. The raft does not lie. It shows us the truth. El Dorado was not greed. It was devotion. The raft itself was discovered centuries later, hidden in a cave, protected perhaps by those who feared the conquistadors would destroy it. When it was found, it was like uncovering not just an object but a memory, a ceremony preserved in gold. Today it rests in a museum, safe, still, but even behind glass, it whispers. It whispers of dawn on a high mountain lake, of mist curling over dark waters, of the Golden One standing tall, then diving into silence. As you let your mind drift now, picture yourself there, on the shore, hearing the drums echo softly, seeing torches flicker, feeling the air cool against your skin. The raft glimmers, a reminder that some stories live forever in objects, that devotion leaves traces, that legends are not only told, they are crafted in gold. It carries the silence of a people who knew that gold was not possession, but offering. It asks us to remember, to slow down, to listen, to let the stillness of the lake fill us as it filled them centuries ago. And so tonight, as you drift toward sleep, let the image linger, the lake, the raft, the Golden One diving into the deep, the offering sinking softly, silently, into eternity. The story is not gone. It floats still, in the raft, in the legend, in the quiet of your dreams. The Egyptian Djed Pillar Mystery. There are symbols in ancient Egypt that feel alive, symbols that hold not only shapes but whispers and secrets and meanings that stretch far beyond the sands of time. One of these symbols is the Djed Pillar. Imagine yourself walking among the ruins of Egypt. The air is dry, heavy with the warmth of the sun. Columns rise like guardians of stone. Carvings line the walls, hieroglyphs etched into eternity. And there, again and again, notice a strange symbol. A pillar. A vertical shaft, topped with a stack of 4 horizontal lines. Simple, geometric, yet unmistakably powerful. The Djed. To the ancient Egyptians, it was called the backbone of the god Osiris. A pillar of stability. A symbol of endurance, of strength that could not be broken. Think of a tree trunk, rooted deep into the earth. Think of a spine, upright and unyielding. Think of a column that holds up not just a temple, but the very order of the world. This was the Djed. But what did it truly mean? Was it only a symbol, or was it something more, a piece of forgotten knowledge, an echo of a science we no longer understand? The question lingers like desert wind, and it keeps scholars awake, generation after generation. Now close your eyes, and picture an ancient ritual. It is dawn. The priests of Egypt gather in silence. They carry the pillar, crafted of wood, or stone, or perhaps something more. They raise it with careful hands, slowly, steadily, until it stands upright, straight, tall, unshakable. This was called the raising of the Djed, a festival of stability, a prayer in action, a reminder that even as chaos swirled, there was something eternal holding the world upright. Some say the Djed was only ritual, a spiritual gesture, a symbol of Osiris rising from death. But others wonder if there was more. Look at it again, the shaft. The stacked lines. Does it resemble a column of stone? Or does it resemble something else? A device, a piece of technology long forgotten. There are whispers, theories that drift through books and late-night conversations. Some see in the Djed a kind of energy conductor, a symbol not only of stability, but of power. 4 lines, stacked like coils, a vertical rod like a channel. Could it have been an ancient representation of electricity, a forgotten science, wrapped in sacred meaning? It is easy to dismiss, but harder to forget. The Egyptians were not primitive. They were builders of marvels we still cannot fully explain. Pyramids aligned with stars, temples carved with impossible precision, chambers resonating with sound in ways that feel deliberate. Could the Djed Pillar belong to this hidden knowledge? Could it be both symbol and science? Step back now. Look at how often it appears, carved into tombs, painted in sacred texts, placed near the bodies of pharaohs as if to guide them beyond death. Sometimes, it rests near the heart. Sometimes, it stands tall beside a god. Always, it radiates quiet strength. It is as though the Egyptians were saying, this is the key, this is the spine of the universe. Do not forget. And yet, we have forgotten. We puzzle. We guess. We hold the Djed in museums and on dusty shelves. We photograph. We measure it, but its heartbeat, its true meaning, remains hidden. Think of Osiris now, the god of death and rebirth, his body broken, scattered, and then restored, upright again. alive again. The Jed was his backbone, his strength, his resurrection. When it stood upright, it was not only Osiris who rose, it was the entire order of the cosmos, a promise that life continues, that death is not an ending. Sit with that for a moment. The pillar is more than shape. It is rhythm, it is heartbeat, it is breath. When you breathe in, your spine rises. When you breathe out, your body steadies. The Jed is in you too. And yet the questions remain. Was it only symbol, or was it tool, a forgotten device of sound, a stabilizer of temples, a channel of power, lost to time? Each answer slips away like sand through fingers, but the mystery remains, and the mystery itself becomes the treasure. Picture it again, a pillar in the desert, carved in stone, standing upright under the sun, unshaken by wind, unbroken by centuries. This is the Jed, silent, patient, waiting, a mystery that will not yield, a secret spine holding Egypt's story together. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavy, imagine the Jed rising, slowly, steadily, lifted by hands that believed it carried the universe, a spine for gods and men alike. See it in your mind, a pillar of strength, a backbone of eternity, and let it stand in your dreams, a reminder that even in chaos, something holds you upright, something carries you through. The Jarroft chlorite vessels. There are discoveries that appear suddenly, out of the ground, out of silence, out of forgotten valleys, and they change the way we think about history itself. One such discovery came from Iran, from a place called Jarroft. The Jarroft Valley rests quietly in the southeastern lands of Iran, where the Halil River winds its way through a desert plain. For centuries, the valley seemed ordinary, a stretch of earth dotted with villages, fields, and mountains in the distance. But beneath its soil lay secrets. Secrets waiting to be seen. It began, as many great discoveries do, not in museums or universities, but with chance. Local villagers stumbled upon artifacts, strange objects buried in the ground, objects carved with symbols, figures and shapes that no one could immediately explain. They were made of chlorite, a dark greenish stone, hard, yet workable. Ancient hands had shaped it into vessels, cups, jars, bowls, containers. But these were no ordinary bowls. Imagine holding one in your hands, cool stone against your skin, the surface etched with patterns, serpents winding upward, scorpions frozen in mid-motion, strange winged creatures with human faces, mythical beings whose names we do not know. Each vessel is a story. Each vessel is a window. Each vessel whispers of a civilization we barely understand. Scholars call it the Jarroft culture. Some even dare to say that what lies here in Iran could rival Mesopotamia, the so-called cradle of civilization itself. Could Jarroft have been another cradle, another birthplace of writing, of symbols, of myth, of power? The chlorite vessels suggest so. Look closely. The carvings are not simple decoration. They are deliberate. They tell stories of gods and beasts. They hint at a cosmology, a way of seeing the world, a way of ordering life that was deep and layered and ancient even in its own time. One vessel shows a hero grappling with two serpents. Another shows a throne, flanked by guardian creatures. Others bear repeating patterns, circles, grids, flowing lines, like codes carved in stone. What were they for? Were they ritual containers, used in ceremonies long lost? Were they offerings, left beside the dead as guides into the afterlife? Or were they symbols of power, objects held by kings and priests to show the strength of their rule? We do not know, but their presence, their weight, their silence invites endless curiosity. Think of the effort, quarries where the stone was cut, workshops where artisans labored, hands chiseling, carving, shaping, with tools of copper or bronze, long before steel was known. Think of the skill, every line precise, every figure alive, every symbol placed with care. This was no casual work, this was devotion in stone. And yet, the mystery deepens, for many of these vessels surfaced not through planned excavation, but through looting, through hurried digs, through markets where priceless history was sold for coins. By the time archaeologists arrived, hundreds of vessels had already scattered into the world, some in private collections, some in museums, many vanished into secrecy. It is as though history was broken apart, like a mirror shattered, its pieces flung across the globe. And so the questions linger. Who carved the vessels? What culture thrived in Jarroft? Was it an extension of Mesopotamia, a neighbor to the Indus Valley, or something else, a civilization we have forgotten almost completely? The vessels do not answer. They only sit, silent, but heavy with meaning. Now close your eyes. Imagine walking into a dim chamber. The air smells of stone and earth. Torches flicker, and there on the ground a circle of chlorite vessels, each one carved, each one glowing faintly in the firelight. Priests gather around them, chanting, whispering, pouring offerings into the stone. Water, wine, milk, honey, symbols of life flowing into symbols of eternity. The vessels were not empty. They were full of meaning, full of purpose. And here is the haunting thought. If Jiroft truly held a great civilization, then how much of our story is missing? How much of human history lies buried, unwritten, beneath valleys we walk across today without knowing? The chlorite vessels remind us that the past is bigger than we imagine, that civilizations rise and fall, and their memory becomes dust, unless by chance we find their vessels waiting. So tonight, as you drift into rest, picture those vessels, dark stone, carved with serpents and wings, resting in the silence of the earth. They have waited for thousands of years. They can wait longer still, but when we find them, they speak, not in words we can easily translate, but in symbols, in mystery, in quiet endurance. The Jiroft chlorite vessels, silent guardians of a forgotten world, pillars of memory and stone. The Etowah copper plates. In the rolling green hills of Georgia, where rivers curve and mounds rise gently from the earth, there lies one of North America's quiet treasures, the Etowah Indian mounds. At first glance, these mounds look like simple hills, covered in grass, shaped by time, but beneath their soil, within chambers of earth and clay, archaeologists uncovered something that shines with both mystery and power: the Etowah copper plates. These plates are thin sheets of hammered copper, crafted by the hands of Mississippian people nearly 1,000 years ago. They were not coins, nor tools, nor weapons. They were images. Striking, detailed, deliberate images. Figures of warriors, dancers, creatures, and gods. Faces sharp, eyes intent, headdresses spreading like rays of the sun. Bodies caught in motion, hands holding weapons, wings stretching outward. The copper plates are not just art. They are windows into a belief system, a mythology expressed in metal. Copper itself was precious. It was gathered from distant sources, traded across rivers and valleys, carried over great distances to reach the people of Etowah. It was hammered thin with stone tools, shaped carefully, polished until it caught the light like fire. Imagine the gleam of a copper plate in the sun, its figure shining as though alive. Imagine it raised during a ritual, reflecting the sky above and the fire below. These plates were not meant to be hidden, they were meant to be seen. Many of the plates show a figure known as the Birdman, a warrior with wings, a figure who blends human strength with the flight of a bird. He appears in multiple forms across Mississippian art, sometimes in motion, sometimes standing in authority, always powerful. What did the Birdman mean? Was he a god of war, a spirit of the sky, a symbol of a ruling class? We do not know for certain, but the repeated image suggests importance, a presence felt across the Mississippian world. Other plates show dancers, figures moving in ritual steps, holding rattles or staffs. There are serpents too, long, coiled, twisting creatures that may have represented the underworld. And there are weapons, maces, axes, symbols of strength and conflict. Taken together, the copper plates form a kind of language, a language not of words but of images, a mythology written in metal. The plates were found in burial mounds, placed carefully with the dead. They may have been symbols of honor, marks of status, gifts meant to guide the soul to another world. Some scholars believe they show the great division of the Mississippian cosmos, the upper world of birds and sky, the middle world of humans, the lower world of serpents and water. The copper plates become maps, teaching tools, ritual instruments, each one carrying meaning beyond its surface. Think of the hands that made them, hammering copper again and again, smoothing it flat, etching sharp lines, carving the form of a warrior or a dancer, knowing that this plate would one day rest in the earth beside someone of great importance. These were not casual decorations, they were sacred objects, objects tied to belief, to death, to power. But here is the puzzle. Why copper? Why this fragile, thin, easily tarnished metal? Gold or stone might have lasted longer, yet copper was chosen. Perhaps because copper glows like the sun, perhaps because its surface can flash like lightning, perhaps because, to the Mississippians, copper was more than a metal. It was life, fire and sky forged into one. The Etowah copper plates also connect to a larger story. Similar plates have been found in other parts of the Mississippian world, in Spiro, in Oklahoma, in Moundville, in Alabama, in Cahokia near the Mississippi River. This suggests a network, a culture stretching far and wide, people connected by rivers, by trade, by belief. The Birdman and the serpent appear again and again, as if shared across distances, as if the same gods were worshipped in different lands. Today, many of the copper plates rest in museums. They are carefully preserved, their green patina a sign of centuries underground. But when you stand before one, you can feel the presence it once held, the sharpness of its image, the quiet authority of its design. It is more than art. It is a voice from a vanished world. And this is where the mystery lies. We have the plates, we have the mounds, we have fragments of Mississippian culture, but we do not have their words. No written records survive, no direct explanations remain. The copper plates show us what they believed, but not why. They reveal gods and spirits, but not the stories behind them. We are left with images, and with silence. So when we speak of the Etowah copper plates, we speak of a people whose voices have faded, but whose art still shines. We speak of a world that rose, flourished, and then was gone, long before Europeans arrived on the continent. The plates remain, thin sheets of hammered copper, fragile yet enduring. They remind us of what has been lost, and of how much more there may be, waiting beneath the earth. The Itawa copper plates. Objects of beauty, objects of belief, glimpses of a world that once lived brightly, and now survives only in metal, in symbol, in mystery. The Khazar silver discs. Far to the north of the Caspian Sea, on lands brushed by cold winds and wide rivers, there was once a people known as the Khazars, a powerful kingdom, a crossroads of trade, a place where merchants, warriors, and travelers passed between east and west. Their empire rose in the 7th century, and for more than 200 years, they held sway over the steppes, controlling trade, controlling armies, and shaping the history of Eurasia. And yet, despite their power, despite their importance, the Khazars remain wrapped in mystery. Much of their story has been lost, their cities faded, their monuments scattered, but sometimes a fragment remains. And among the fragments are the Khazar silver discs. These discs are small, thin, delicate pieces of silver, shaped by hands we will never know. Some are smooth, others engraved with designs, patterns that seem both purposeful and strange. They were not coins, at least not in the way we think of coins. They were not stamped with kings, not marked with values, not designed to buy or sell. So what were they? Some scholars believe the discs were ritual objects, offerings, perhaps carried into ceremonies, perhaps placed with the dead, perhaps exchanged as tokens of loyalty, symbols of status, signs of belonging. Others believe they were trade weights, little markers, carefully measured, used to balance scales, in markets filled with goods from across Eurasia, furs from the north, silk from the east, spices and silver from the south. But then again, the engravings tell another story. Some discs carry marks that seem symbolic. Circles, spirals, geometric signs. Were these clan emblems, religious symbols, protective charms? The Khazars were known to live in a land of many faiths. Some followed old steppe gods, some adopted Christianity, some practiced Islam. And there are stories, still debated by historians, that the Khazar elite converted to Judaism. The discs may hold fragments of these beliefs, etched in metal, passed hand to hand. But let us slow down and picture a moment. A Khazar trader stands at a market stall. The Caspian Sea is not far. Caravans arrive, bringing horses, woven cloth, salt, amber, slaves, jewels. The air is heavy with the smell of hides and spices. At his belt hangs a pouch. Inside, silver discs. Not coins to spend, but tokens to show who he is, where he comes from, what he belongs to. A man approaches. A disc is taken from the pouch. It flashes in the light, and meaning, whatever it truly was, is silently understood. The mystery of the discs deepens because they are so few. Scattered finds, unearthed by accident, sometimes in burial sites, sometimes in hoards, sometimes alone, dropped centuries ago into the earth. And yet when we hold them, we feel the weight of an empire that has nearly vanished. The Khazars were once powerful enough to face the caliphate. They were once respected enough to be courted by Byzantium. They were once influential enough to control the trade arteries of the steppes, and yet today, their empire is silent, gone, leaving only fragments like silver discs quiet in the soil. The discs tell us something else too. They remind us of how much history is lost, not because it was destroyed, but because it was never written. The Khazars left few records. Most of what we know about them comes from outsiders. Byzantines, Arabs, Persians, voices looking in, sometimes hostile, sometimes confused. But the discs, they are Khazar voices, small, shining voices, and though we cannot read them, we know they meant something. Imagine for a moment the craftsman. He sits with a sheet of silver. He hammers it carefully, shaping a thin circle. He etches a mark, perhaps a bird, perhaps a spiral, perhaps a symbol passed down through generations. The disc is polished, slipped into a pouch, and carried away. The craftsman does not know that centuries later, in another world, people will wonder what it meant. What strikes us most is not just their mystery, but their fragility. The discs are small, easily lost, easily melted down, and yet a few survived, enough to whisper of a past we can only half see. Every disc is a reminder that history is not always written in stone. Sometimes it is written in silver, light as a feather, thin as a coin, fragile enough to disappear, unless chance preserves it. The Khazar silver discs may never reveal their full meaning, but in their silence, they remind us of something essential, that even the most powerful empires can vanish, that even the strongest armies can fade, that what survives of us is not always what we expect. The Khazars left no great monuments, no epic texts, but they left silver discs, and those discs, in their simplicity, carry a weight that cannot be measured. They carry memory, they carry mystery, and they carry a story that still lingers, quiet as the Caspian wind, soft as silver. The Hallstatt salt man. Deep in the heart of Austria, in the ancient salt mines of Hallstatt, a body was found. not in a tomb, not in a grave, but in the earth itself, preserved by salt, as though the mountain had chosen to keep him safe for eternity. They call him the Salt Man. A man from more than 2,500 years ago, trapped in time, his story caught between darkness and crystal. Hallstatt is a place of strange beauty. The lake lies still, the mountains rise sharply, and beneath them, hidden from the light, the salt mines stretch into the earth. For thousands of years, people came here not for gold, not for jewels, but for salt, the white treasure of the ancient world. Salt was life. Salt preserved food. Salt could pay armies. Salt was wealth, pure and enduring. And in those mines, where men carved the walls with tools of wood and bone, a man once worked, and it was there, in the depths, that he died. We do not know his name, we do not know his family, but we do know this: he was strong, he was young, and he was part of a world we can barely imagine. When his body was found, his hair still clung to his head, his clothing still wrapped around him. The salt had preserved him, a natural miracle, a frozen breath of time. It was as if he had simply lain down to rest, and the mountain had held him in its arms for centuries. The Salt Man tells us something extraordinary about the people of Hallstatt. Archaeologists found not only his body, but the tools he carried, the clothes he wore, woolen fabric, leather shoes, a cap to shield his head. Simple things, but rich with meaning. These were not savages in the dark. These were people with craft, with skill, with tradition. They mined salt with picks of wood, with torches for light, with systems of ladders and scaffolds, in tunnels so deep they seemed endless. The Salt Man was part of this living world, a worker, a human, caught in a moment that became eternal. But how did he die? Some say it was an accident. The mines were dangerous. Tunnels could collapse. Air could grow thin. A single slip, a single crack of rock, and the earth could swallow a man whole. Others wonder if something darker happened. Was he trapped? Was he abandoned? Was there violence in the dark? We cannot know. All we see is his body, silent, still, whispering only through salt, and yet there is something strangely peaceful about him. His presence feels less like tragedy and more like memory, as though he remains not to frighten us but to remind us that history is not only kings and empires. It is also workers and tunnels, families and villages, ordinary lives carried through extraordinary times. The Salt Man was no pharaoh, no warrior, no scribe. He was a miner, and yet today he is remembered. Archaeologists call the culture of this time the Hallstatt culture. It was a civilization of the early Iron Age, a people who farmed, who traded, who mined the earth for salt. From their mines came wealth, and from their wealth came power. The Salt Man stands as a human face to this culture. He was not a statue, not an artifact, but flesh and bone, preserved so well that his story can still be told. It is almost as if he wanted to be remembered. When you imagine him, try to see him not as a relic, but as a man who walked into the mine one day, lamp in hand, tools at his side, a man who laughed with his companions, a man who carried the weight of salt on his back, just as his father had, and his father before him. And then, one day, his story ended, not in fire, not in war, but in the stillness of stone, and the mountain, without meaning to, gave him to us. Today, the Salt Man rests not in darkness, but in a museum. People come to see him, to look into the face of a man who lived when Europe was young. They stare at his clothes, his hair, his preserved body, and in that moment, they feel the strange closeness of time. 2,500 years vanish, the distance shrinks, and you realize he was like us. He worked, he hoped, he feared, he lived, and though the world he knew has vanished, his story remains, wrapped in salt, unbroken by centuries. The Hallstatt Salt Man is not just a mummy, he is a bridge, a fragile, delicate bridge across time. He connects us to a world before history books, before chronicles, before monuments. He shows us that the past is not gone, only waiting to be uncovered. His silence is not emptiness, it is presence. It is a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary life, a miner in the salt, a man at work, can become extraordinary simply because it survived. And so, as you drift into stillness, imagine him walking into the mine, torchlight flickering on the walls, salt crystals shining like stars in the dark, the sound of picks striking stone, the cool air around him, then silence. And centuries later, the silence breaks as his story is found. The Salt Man waits there still, held in the arms of the mountain, a whisper from a world long gone, a reminder that nothing and no one is ever truly forgotten. The Aztec fire serpent sculpture. Far away in the highlands of Mexico, among the ruins of temples and the stones of forgotten cities, there lies a symbol carved in stone, a figure that once struck awe and fear into the hearts of the Aztec people. They called it the fire serpent. A creature of flame and power, a symbol of movement, of cycles, of cosmic fire. It is more than a sculpture. It is an echo of a worldview, a vision of the universe written not in books but in stone and in myth. The Aztecs were a people of extraordinary imagination. They lived in a world where gods walked beside mortals, where the sky itself was alive with meaning, and where every cycle of the sun, every movement of the stars, was part of a great cosmic story. To them the serpent was sacred. It slithered across earth and water. It could vanish into holes and reappear. It could shed its skin and be reborn. The serpent was life. It was transformation. It was eternity. And the fire serpent was something more. It was energy itself, the blazing path of the sun, the living fire that kept the universe alive. The sculpture we know today shows the serpent in its fierce form. Stone carved with sharp lines, scales etched with precision, eyes wide with intensity, fangs bared in eternal motion. It does not lie still. It coils, it moves, it burns with an energy that refuses to fade. Even though it is silent stone, when you look upon it, you almost hear the crackle of fire. You almost feel the heat rising. You sense the presence of something larger than life, something that is not merely carved, but invoked. In Aztec cosmology, the fire serpent was tied to the god Xiuhcoatl, a creature of flame, a weapon of the gods, a force of destruction and renewal. When warriors carried the image of the fire serpent, they carried with them the blessing of fire. It was a symbol of conquest, but also of cosmic duty. For the Aztecs believed that the universe itself was fragile, and that it was their task, through ritual and sacrifice, to keep the fire of the sun alive. The serpent was not only a monster, not only a symbol of fear, it was also a protector, a cosmic force that gave life meaning. The sculpture itself may have been placed in a temple. Perhaps it guarded the sacred precincts of Tenochtitlan, the great city built on water, where pyramids rose like mountains. Perhaps it stood beside altars, where priests performed the rituals of blood and fire. Or perhaps it was carried in ceremonies, its stone presence a reminder of divine power. Wherever it stood, the fire serpent was not decoration, it was connection. It was a channel between the human and the divine. Imagine for a moment the world of the Aztec night. The torches flicker, the drums beat slowly, the priests chant, their voices rising into the dark, and there, in the firelight, the serpent's stone body glows red and gold, its fangs catching the light, its eyes seeming to move. To the people gathered, it was not just stone, it was alive, it was fire itself, coiled and eternal. But like all things, the fire serpent also carries mystery. Was it purely a symbol of war? Was it a representation of the sun's burning path across the heavens? Or was it something deeper, a memory of older myths, older gods, older serpents that the Aztecs inherited from cultures long before their own? For in Mesoamerica, serpents appear again and again. The Maya had their own feathered serpent, Kukulkan. The earlier Olmecs carved serpent imagery into their stones. It seems that across centuries the serpent was always there, transforming, shifting, never gone. The Aztec fire serpent may have been their own way of carrying forward this ancient legacy, giving it fire, giving it form, making it burn in stone forever. When the Spanish came, when Tenochtitlan fell, when temples were torn down, many of the symbols of Aztec power were destroyed, but some survived. Among them, the fire serpent, a survivor of empire, a fragment of a world that was nearly erased. And today, as we stand before it in museums or ruins, we do not see conquest, we see endurance. We see the human need to carve meaning into stone, to capture fire in something that will outlast time. The fire serpent of the Aztecs speaks quietly now. Its power is no longer invoked with ritual, no longer carried into battle, no longer feared as the weapon of the gods. Instead, it whispers to us of imagination, of a people who saw fire not just as flame, but as the very soul of the cosmos, of a civilization that lived in rhythm with sun and stars and carved that rhythm into stone. It reminds us that myth is never gone. It only changes form, and that even in silence, the serpent still moves. So as you drift into calmness, imagine that serpent again, stone glowing in torchlight, coils alive with heat, eyes flashing in the dark. Not just a sculpture, not just a relic, but a fire that never ends, a fire that lives on in memory. The fire serpent waits, silent, eternal. Its flames burning quietly in the depths of history, a reminder of the Aztecs, and their dream of a universe made of fire and stone. The talisman of Charlemagne. There are some objects in history that feel less like jewelry and more like keys, keys that open doors into forgotten worlds, into empires, into the secret faith of rulers long gone. The talisman of Charlemagne is one such key. It is small, at first glance a golden reliquary pendant, oval in shape, its frame worked with fine filigree, its glass windows protecting what lies within. But like all small things in history, its weight is not in size, it is in story, it is in power. It is in the whispers that cling to it, century after century. The talisman is said to have belonged to Charlemagne, the king who became emperor, the man who bound together lands from France to Germany, from the Alps to the North Sea, a ruler so mighty that even after death, he was remembered as the father of Europe. And yet, this talisman was not a crown, not a sword, not a scepter of command. It was something quieter, something intimate, a small reliquary worn close to the heart. Inside, legend says were relics of the Holy Land, fragments of the true cross, perhaps even strands of the Virgin's hair, sacred tokens carried by the emperor, pressed against his chest as he rode into battle, as he knelt in prayer, as he dreamed of uniting Christendom under one banner. For Charlemagne, this talisman was more than ornament. It was protection. It was blessing. It was a reminder that even the greatest of kings stood beneath the shadow of God. And here is where the story bends into mystery. Some chronicles tell us that when Charlemagne died in Aachen, the talisman was placed with him in his tomb. For centuries, it lay there in the darkness, resting on his bones, a silent companion of the emperor's eternal sleep. But centuries later, when his tomb was opened by Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, the talisman was taken out. From that moment, its path became tangled in legend. Who truly held it? Where did it travel? Was it guarded by kings, or hidden by priests, or lost in the turmoil of wars? Each age told its own version. By the 19th century, the talisman surfaced again, and this time, it carried a new story. Napoleon's wife, Empress Josephine, is said to have worn it, keeping it close as if the blessing of Charlemagne himself could pass into her. When she died, it passed to her daughter, then to her grandson, and finally, in the 20th century, it returned to Aachen, to the very city where Charlemagne had once ruled. A circle complete. A relic come home. Today you can still see it. The golden oval, the delicate glass, the fragments of sacred relics within, and you can almost imagine the great king riding across Europe, the talisman swinging against his chest, catching the sun, a glimmer of gold against armor and cloak. But when you look at it closely, a quiet question rises. Was it truly his, or was the story woven later, layered with centuries of faith and longing, until the talisman itself seemed to shine with more than gold, with legend itself? This is the power of such objects. They blur the line between truth and myth. They become vessels, not only of relics, but of memory, of empire, of identity. For the people of Aachen, the talisman is not just jewelry, it is a piece of their emperor. A reminder that Charlemagne is not gone. He still lingers, in stone cathedrals, in the crown of the Holy Roman Empire, and in a small golden oval that once beat in rhythm with his heart. Think of it now, a simple pendant, an object you could hold in the palm of your hand. Yet within it, centuries unfold, kings and queens pass it on, empires rise and fall around it. Wars rage, faith wavers, cities burn, and still, the talisman survives. It is quiet, but it is enduring. It does not command like a crown. It does not wound like a sword, but it binds. It binds the living to the dead, the present to the past, the earthly to the divine. So as you drift into thought, imagine Charlemagne himself, a king seated on his throne in Aachen, the talisman resting against his chest, its relics pressed close to the beating of his heart. In that moment, he is not only an emperor, he is a man, seeking protection, seeking blessing, seeking a thread to hold on to in a world of war and uncertainty. That thread still glimmers, it still waits, in gold, in glass, in story, in the talisman of Charlemagne. The Olbia bone plaques. When we think of the ancient world, it is often the massive things that come to mind first: great pyramids, stone temples, towers that were said to reach toward heaven. But sometimes the most extraordinary mysteries are not the largest, but the smallest. Objects that could fit in the palm of your hand, yet carry with them the weight of entire civilizations. The Olbia bone plaques are exactly that. Discovered in the ruins of the ancient Greek colony of Olbia, a city founded along the northern shores of the Black Sea, these fragile little pieces of bone whisper of a world that has been almost completely erased from memory. They are not monumental. They are not breathtaking to look at. At first glance, you might pass them by. Thin scraps of animal bone, smoothed by time, covered in tiny carved markings. But the more you look, the more you realize these are not just discarded fragments. They are voices, they are messages, they are the traces of people who lived more than 2,000 years ago. People whose thoughts, fears, and hopes were etched into bone so that something of them might survive. Imagine the city of Olbia in its prime, a place where Greek settlers and Sava nomads crossed paths every day. On one side, merchants unloading amphorae of olive oil and wine. On the other, steppe warriors arriving on horseback, their clothing decorated with gold ornaments, their speech rough and unfamiliar, the air heavy with the smell of the sea, the cries of fishermen, the ringing of hammers from the blacksmith's workshop. And among all of this movement and sound, ordinary people went about their lives, holding close their private beliefs, their household gods, and perhaps their bone plaques. Each plaque carries inscriptions. Some are clear: prayers to Apollo, the god of the sun, the god of healing and prophecy. Some are devoted to Dionysus, the god of wine, frenzy, and sacred ecstasy. And then there are others, fragments of words, sequences of letters that scholars still cannot fully translate. Are they magic spells, secret codes, forgotten dialects? No one knows for certain, but the care with which they were carved suggests something important. These were not idle doodles. They were meant to do something, to protect, to invoke, to connect with powers greater than the individual who carried them. And here is where the mystery deepens. These plaques were not discovered, locked away in temples, or sealed in tombs. They were scattered among ordinary ruins, mixed into the dust of collapsed homes, found near hearths, in rubbish pits, and in the remains of common houses. This suggests that they were not just priestly tools of ceremony. They belonged to everyday people, farmers, traders, sailors, mothers, children. Close your eyes for a moment and picture it. A fisherman, returning from the river with his catch, places a bone plaque near his lamp before eating his meal. A young woman carries one tucked into a small pouch, believing it will keep her safe during childbirth. A merchant places one beneath his stall, whispering a prayer to Apollo that his grain will sell before it spoils. Small acts of belief, repeated again and again, until they became woven into the fabric of life in Olbia. And yet, even as we imagine, the questions remain. Were these plaques meant as talismans? Were they objects of private devotion? Or did they serve a more secret function, tools of a hidden cult, tokens exchanged in rituals that outsiders were never meant to see? The mystery only grows when we look closer at the inscriptions. Some appear rushed, as though carved quickly, with little concern for beauty. Others are careful, symmetrical, almost artistic. Some use words we know, others string together letters that make no sense. It is as if they are fragments of conversations overheard, half-remembered chants, broken pieces of a language that has since dissolved into silence. And yet, we can feel the human presence in them, the hand that held the tool, the mind that formed the letters, the hope or fear that drove someone to scratch those words into bone. It is humbling, isn't it, to realize that what survives of a person's faith, after centuries, might be no more than a few carved lines on a sliver of animal bone. But in those lines lies something vast, a need for protection, a cry to the gods, a wish for fortune, perhaps even an attempt to bend fate. We may never fully understand them, but that is what makes them powerful. They remind us that history is not only about what we know, it is also about what we do not know, about the spaces in between knowledge, about the mysteries that resist explanation. Think of how fragile they are, bones that could crumble at the touch, yet they outlasted their makers. They survived the collapse of Olbia. They endured the passage of centuries, buried in earth, hidden from light, waiting for the moment when someone would dig them up and wonder. And perhaps that is the greatest role they now play, not as magical tools, not as holy objects, but as teachers of humility. They remind us that the past is vast and complicated, and that even the most ordinary people left behind traces as mysterious as the grandest monuments. The Olbia bone plaques are small, but their questions are enormous. They whisper of gods and rituals, of everyday people and private fears, of cultures meeting and mingling on the edge of the known world. And as you listen to that whisper, as you let your mind wander through the ruins of Olbia, past its crumbling walls, across its empty courtyards, and down into the silence where these plaques were found, you may begin to feel it, the mystery, the unanswered questions, the quiet sense that even in fragments, even in bone, the past still speaks. The Chavin Lanzón monolith. Deep in the highlands of Peru, where mist curls over the mountains like smoke, there lies a temple, ancient even before the Inca, mysterious even in its silence. Within this temple, hidden in its heart, stands a monolith. A single stone, carved thousands of years ago. A stone that carries not just images, but a voice we cannot fully understand, yet one that has echoed through centuries. They call it the Lanzón. The Lanzón monolith is no ordinary stone carving. Rising nearly 15 feet in height, locked within the sacred temple of Chavin de Huantar, it is a guardian, a messenger, a god frozen in rock. To look upon it is to look into another world, a world where humans and animals, reality and vision, blur into one. Imagine walking into the temple, thousands of years ago. You leave behind the bright Andean sky and step into corridors carved of stone, narrow and twisting, leading you deeper and deeper into the earth. The air grows heavy, the light disappears. And then, in the innermost chamber, you see it. A massive granite figure, sharp-fanged, with the eyes of a jaguar, the claws of a predator, the hair of writhing snakes. Its mouth curls upward, half in a snarl, half in a smile. It towers above you, as if alive, as if watching. This is not just art. This is power carved in stone. The people who built the Chavin civilization believed the Lanzón was the axis of the world, the very point where heaven, earth, and the underworld touched. For them, it was not just a monolith. It was the living embodiment of their god, a god who controlled the cycles of life and death, a god who balanced chaos and order. And here is where the mystery begins. No one knows exactly what rituals took place around the Lanzón. The temple itself was designed like a labyrinth. Some corridors lead nowhere. Some twist back on themselves. Some open into chambers filled with shadows and echoes. Archaeologists believe that priests guided initiates through these mazes in complete darkness, leading them step by step to the heart of the temple where the Lanzone loomed, and there, in flickering torchlight, with the echo of dripping water and the sound of distant chanting, the initiate would stand face to face with the god carved in stone. What would they have felt in that moment? Fear? Awe? A trembling sense of revelation? The Lanzone is not gentle to look at. Its face is ferocious, its eyes wide, its fangs bared. But it is also strangely balanced. Every line of its carving is symmetrical. Every claw, every curl of its hair mirrors its opposite. It is a fusion of opposites, man and beast, life and death, creation and destruction. Perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the priests of Chavin were showing their people that the world itself was a balance of contradictions, and that only through the god of the Lanzone could harmony be achieved. Some believe that hallucinogenic plants were part of these rituals. The San Pedro cactus, which contains powerful psychoactive properties, grows in the Andean highlands. Imagine drinking a bitter brew prepared by the priests, feeling your vision blur, your senses shift, and then being led into the temple labyrinth. In total darkness, with chants surrounding you, you stumble forward until you reach the monolith. The stone seems to move, the carved eyes seem to glow, the snarling mouth speaks, and you believe, with every part of your being, that the god is alive before you. Is this why the Lanzone was carved the way it was? With lines that twist, faces that morph, details that overlap like illusions? Was it designed not just to be seen, but to be experienced in altered states of mind? Archaeologists cannot say for certain, but when you stand before the Lanzone today, even in silence, you can feel it. The sense that this stone was never just stone, that it was meant to pull you into another reality. And yet we know so little of the Chavin people. We do not know their language. We cannot read their inscriptions, for they left none. What survives are their temples, their art, their monoliths, symbols without words, voices without sound. The Lanzone remains at the center of it all. Think of the effort it took to create. A single block of granite, hauled into the temple, carved with precision in twisting corridors where light barely reaches. The artists who cut its lines may never have seen it in full daylight. They worked in shadows, yet carved something meant to last forever. Thousands of years later, their work still stands, silent but commanding. What secrets did they believe it held? Did they think the god would speak through it? Did they think it was alive, watching, judging, protecting? Some scholars suggest the Lanzone was also an oracle, that priests would position themselves in hidden passageways, speaking through channels that made their voices seem to come from the monolith itself. Imagine kneeling in the dark before the stone, hearing a booming voice echo through the chamber, believing it was the god speaking directly to you. What would you give in that moment? What vow would you make? What fear would grip you? And so, the Lanzone is more than art. It is architecture, ritual, illusion, and faith combined. It stands as the core of Chavin culture, but also as one of its greatest mysteries. For centuries, people have asked, why was it built? What stories are hidden in its carvings? And why was it left behind, sealed in darkness, as if meant to be found only by those willing to walk into the unknown? As you let your mind wander through these questions, imagine standing in that temple now. The highland air is cool. The stone walls press close around you. The sound of water drips in the distance, echoing softly, endlessly. Your footsteps fall heavy in the corridors. You turn, twist, lose your bearings, until suddenly you stand before it, the Lanzone, towering, carved, unblinking. Even after thousands of years, it still commands silence. It still demands respect. And perhaps, in its stillness, it still speaks. The Chavin people are long gone. Their cities have crumbled. Their language is lost. But in that monolith, in that fanged, clawed, eternal stone, something remains, something we may never fully understand. And maybe that is the point. Maybe the Lanzone was never meant to be explained. Maybe it was meant only to be felt. The San Pedro mountain mummy. High in the windswept mountains of Wyoming, where stone cliffs guard lonely valleys and streams cut through silence, there was once a discovery so strange, so unsettling, that it still refuses to be explained. A discovery that seemed at first like nothing more than a curiosity, but one that soon spiraled into legend, mystery, and whispers of forgotten people. They called it the San Pedro mountain mummy. It was 1932, in the rugged land near Casper, Wyoming. Two prospectors, searching for gold, were blasting through rock with dynamite. Dust clouded the air, echoes rolled across the mountain ridges. When the dust settled, they found that the explosion had revealed something unusual, a small cavern, sealed for who knows how many centuries. Inside, sitting upright on a ledge as if patiently waiting, was a figure. At first glance it looked like a doll, tiny, fragile, barely more than a foot tall. But the closer they looked, the more they realized it was no toy, it was a human being. The mummy was perfectly preserved, its skin leathery, its features sharp. It sat cross-legged, hands resting calmly on its knees. Its head was large compared to its body, with a flat nose, broad mouth, and what looked like a full set of teeth, still visible beneath shriveled lips. Its arms were thin but defined, and its posture was steady, almost meditative. The prospectors stared in disbelief. The figure, later measured, was about 14 inches tall, a fully formed, seated human being, preserved in death. The San Pedro mummy, as it came to be known, instantly fueled a storm of fascination and fear. What was it? Who had it been? And how could a fully formed human be so small? Scientists, journalists, and locals all came to see. Some thought it was the body of a baby, but medical examinations at the time suggested otherwise. X-rays reportedly revealed a full set of adult teeth. The proportions of the body, they said, were not infant-like. Even the skull seemed developed in a way that didn't match a child. If that were true, then what exactly were they looking at? Was this some unknown culture, a people of tiny stature who once lived in the mountains of Wyoming? Legends of little people run deep in Native American traditions. Many tribes of the Great Plains and Rocky Mountains spoke of small, human-like beings who lived in caves, often with magical powers or dangerous tempers. The Shoshone told of beings they called the Nimerigar, small, fierce warriors who carried tiny bows and poisoned arrows. According to the legends, they could kill with a single shot, and they were both feared and respected. Some stories even said the Nimerigar practiced strange rituals, and when one of their people grew too old or weak, the others would end their life with a blow to the head. When the San Pedro mummy was examined, X-rays seemed to show damage to its skull, as if it had been struck, the bone shattered near the head. Was this just coincidence? Or was it evidence that the Shoshone stories held truth? The mummy was displayed for a time, drawing crowds. Scientists debated. Some dismissed it as a hoax. Others insisted it was genuine. In the decades that followed, the mystery only deepened. The mummy changed hands, passing from collectors to showmen. At some point, it vanished from public record. Today, no one knows exactly where it is. All that remains are photographs, reports, and the enduring legend of the little being found in the Wyoming mountains. And so the questions linger. If the San Pedro mummy was real, who was it? Was it a child with a rare condition, whose body had been preserved by the dry cave air? Or was it something far stranger, the remains of a race of tiny people, remembered only in native stories and dismissed as myth until one was found sealed in stone? Think about the atmosphere of that discovery for a moment. Two prospectors, dusty and tired, expecting nothing more than rock and maybe traces of gold. Instead, they uncover a cavern that has been sealed for centuries. They peer inside, and there, waiting in the shadows, is a tiny human, sitting upright as though guarding the mountain itself. It is not difficult to imagine how their hearts must have raced, how their hands must have trembled. And it is not difficult to imagine how word spread, quickly, feverishly, like fire through dry grass. For humans are drawn to mystery, to the unknown, especially when it takes a form so familiar, and yet so impossible. The San Pedro mummy remains one of the most controversial finds in American archaeology. Without the body to study today, we are left with speculation. The photographs, grainy and old, still show the figure with its wrinkled face, its sharp features, its eerie stillness, enough to stir doubt, enough to stir belief. Was it truly the body of an adult, little person? Or was it simply a tragic infant death, misunderstood by early science? Or was it something deliberately placed in the mountain, sealed away in ritual, a guardian or offering we can no longer interpret? The truth is, we may never know, but in the end, maybe the mystery is what gives it power. The San Pedro mummy, real or legend, continues to haunt the imagination because it touches something deep within us, the need to believe that the world still holds secrets, that not everything has been explained, that in the hidden corners of mountains and deserts there are still discoveries waiting. Even now, if you walk the lonely trails of Wyoming, with the wind howling through the pines and the cliffs casting long shadows, you might wonder, are the old stories true? Do the little people still linger, watching from the caves, waiting in silence? The San Pedro mountain mummy may be gone, but its mystery remains. The bog mummies of Tolland. There are some faces from the past that feel closer than carved stone or painted walls, faces that do not look like myths or legends, but like people who could step into our world even now. One such face lies preserved, soft and still, beneath the dark embrace of a Danish bog, the face of the Tolland man. His eyes are closed, his lips are pressed gently, almost into a smile. His skin, though centuries old, still lies smooth across his cheekbones. When you look at him, you do not see only a body, you see a man who once breathed, once walked, once felt the sun on his skin and the wind in his hair, and then, one day, his life ended, and he was lowered into the watery grave of the bog. The peat closed around him, the centuries passed, and yet he remained. Not a skeleton, not a ghost, but a whole person, resting as if only asleep. The bogs of Denmark are not ordinary graves, they are strange, almost sacred landscapes. They preserve not only bone but skin, hair, clothes, even the look upon a person's face, like nature's own tomb, wrapping its arms tightly around those who fall into it. The Tallinn man lay in this embrace for over 2,000 years. When he was discovered in 1950, the workers who dug him up thought they had found a murder victim. So fresh was his face, so natural his posture, so alive his skin. But no, he was ancient, older than the books of history, older than the rise of kingdoms, older than even the oldest legends of his land. And yet, his story is not fully told. Why was he placed here? Was he punished? Was he sacrificed? Or was he honored in some way we no longer understand? Around his neck there was a rope, a braided noose of leather. It tells us that his death was not by age, not by accident. It was deliberate. And so the mystery deepens. Was this an execution, a punishment for some crime? Or was this ritual, an offering to the gods of the earth, the harvest, the sky? We cannot ask him. He cannot answer. And so the silence of the bog whispers back only mystery. Yet, when you look at his face, it is not pain you see, not fear, not anger, but calm, peaceful, almost gentle. It is as if he accepted his fate, as if he closed his eyes and let the bog carry him away, as if the earth itself promised him rest. There is something haunting about that stillness, something almost sacred. It does not frighten, it draws you closer. It makes you wonder, what was this man's final thought, his final prayer, his final dream? The bogs are filled with such mysteries. Other bodies have been found, other faces, other stories, men, women, even children, some with twisted limbs, some with signs of violence, some with precious objects by their side. Each one is a puzzle, each one a voice half heard across time, but none more human, more intimate, more touching than the Tallinn man. Because he does not look like a relic, he looks like a man you might meet on the street, as if he had only just closed his eyes for sleep. Now picture this. The wind blows across the flat Danish marshes, the sky is low, heavy with clouds, the peat beneath your feet is soft, spongy, breathing water with every step, and beneath that peat, he rests. For centuries storms raged above, generations passed, kingdoms rose and fell. The bog did not care, it simply held him, kept him, guarded him, until one day, by chance, human hands lifted him once more into the world of light. And now, there he lies in a museum, in a glass case. People come and lean close. They look into his face, they feel the quiet hush of recognition. For this is not just history, it is humanity. His body may be ancient, but his presence is alive. It whispers something deep, something universal, that life is fragile, that time is long, that memory can endure in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes, the past is not so far away. So tonight, as you drift with these words, let his story stay with you, the story of the man who closed his eyes 2,000 years ago, and still lies in silence, as if waiting. The Tallinn man rests in darkness, but his face carries the light of recognition. We do not know his name, we do not know his life, but we know his humanity, and in knowing it, we feel something eternal. The bog keeps its secrets, but the Tallinn man keeps his calm, and in that calm, in that endless sleep, he becomes more than a mystery. He becomes a mirror, a reflection of ourselves, of time, of silence, a reminder that even in death, there can be peace, and even in silence, there can be song. The Phrygian rock-cut tomb of Midas, high in the ancient lands of Anatolia, where the winds sweep through rocky valleys, and the earth carries the memory of forgotten kings, there stands a monument that is less a building and more a song carved into stone. It is called the Tomb of Midas. Though perhaps it is not a tomb at all, perhaps it is a riddle, perhaps it is a voice in stone, whispering across the centuries. When you first see it, the face of the cliff rises before you, like a wall of time. Its surface has been cut with delicate precision, etched with geometric patterns, lines that seem both mathematical and sacred. It is not just a doorway, it is a facade that resembles a temple, a shrine, a portal. Tall, wide, commanding, it stares out across the landscape of Phrygia, as though watching, as though waiting. A people who rose in central Anatolia, after the fall of the Hittites, were master builders, master stonecutters, and keepers of myths that still ripple through our world today. They gave us the story of King Midas, the man with the golden touch, the man who turned all he touched to treasure, and who in some versions of the tale was buried in this very place. But what is myth, and what is memory? The stone waits, and does not answer. Imagine a giant rug of stone patterns running across its face, straight lines and right angles cut into the living rock. Some say it resembles a sacred screen, others, a gateway between the world of mortals and the world of gods. At the center, a small opening, a doorway, or the idea of a doorway. Was it meant to be entered? Or was it symbolic, a reminder that the dead pass through unseen thresholds, into places the living cannot follow? Some say it was not truly Midas's tomb, but a monument built to honor him, or to honor Cybele, the great mother goddess of the Phrygians. For Cybele's cult was strong here, a worship of fertility, of mountains, of wildness, and the rock-cut facade may have been her temple, a shrine carved into the bones of the earth itself. And yet the name persists, the tomb of Midas, because legend has a way of clinging to stone, refusing to fade. Picture it, now, the 8th century before Christ, Phrygia alive with music, with flutes and lyres echoing across the hills, priests in robes ascending the steps of the rock, offerings laid at the base of the great carved face, fires burning in bronze bowls, and above them the silent facade, watching, always watching. Perhaps Midas himself once stood before it, his eyes searching the lines in the rock, his hands resting against the cold stone. Perhaps he knew that one day his story would not be written in papyrus, nor in clay, but in cliffs where no wind could erase it. Time passed. Empires came and went. The Phrygians faded. The Greeks told their myths. The Romans spread their empire. The Byzantines raised their churches. The Ottomans built their cities. And still the tomb of Midas stood, unmoved, unbroken, its face weathered by centuries, but still sharp, still present, like the memory of a song you cannot forget. Travelers in later ages came upon it and were astonished. How could people, so long ago, carve something so vast, so precise, into the side of a mountain? No mortar, no bricks, no scaffolds remain. Only the cuts of chisels, the marks of men who stood here nearly 3,000 years ago and worked until the stone itself obeyed their vision. Some said it was the work of giants. Some said it was a temple to gods forgotten. Some simply stood in awe, silent before its face, as we still do today. And then, the questions come. Was it truly a tomb? If so, where are the remains? Where are the bones, the treasures, the offerings of a king? No chamber has been found behind the facade, no burial chamber revealed. The doorway seems symbolic, not practical. So perhaps the tomb of Midas is not a tomb at all. Perhaps it is something else. A monument, a shrine, a sacred geometry in stone, meant to endure long after memory has faded. But the legend of Midas lingers, the man cursed by his own desire. The man who learned too late that gold cannot feed the soul. Perhaps the Phrygians carved his monument as a warning. Perhaps they wished to remind all who came after that wealth fades, but stone endures. Perhaps. Today when you visit, you walk along quiet paths, through the valleys of central Turkey. The air is dry, the wind whistles across empty fields. And then, suddenly, it rises before you. The facade is immense, its patterns etched against the sky. Birds circle above it. The land feels hushed, as though even nature bows before the weight of its presence. You step closer, you place your hand upon the cold rock, and you feel time itself beneath your fingers. The tomb of Midas remains one of history's mysteries, not only because we do not fully understand its purpose, but because it embodies the strange way myth and stone intertwine. Is it a grave, a shrine, a temple, a warning, or all of these at once? What we know for certain is this. The Phrygians carved their voice into the mountain, and that voice still speaks, softly, steadily, through the centuries. Close your eyes now, and imagine it under the moonlight, the patterns glowing silver, the shadows deepening in the carved lines, silence all around. The cliff like a cathedral, the facade like a hymn in stone. No words are needed. The rock speaks for itself, and whether it holds the body of a king, or only the memory of his name, it has achieved something greater. It has endured. So the tomb of Midas is not just a monument. It is a meditation, on power, on memory, on the desire to be remembered. It is a whisper carved into stone, a voice that outlasts empires, a reminder that even myths need a home. And in the cliffs of Phrygia, they found one.